Hey folks, welcome back. So today we're going to look at a recent supplement to the Yellow King role-playing game. It's called Legions of Carcosa. This is the bestiary, basically, for the system. Now, as you saw in the original books, there are quite a few foes for each of the 4 different sequences, as they're called, in the 4 main books. But here they've expanded on that massively, and each creature, of course, comes with new shock and injury cards that are more specific to its abilities and, maintain that flavor that the main game has, the quick shock gumshoe system. Simplifying the process of tracking your sanity and your physical health by just having a hand of cards, and when you pass a certain limit, that's it. But also giving each card an in-game mechanical effect so that you feel the effects of your injuries, and it makes you more and more urgently want to discard those cards so that you can return to better mental health or better physical condition. So it'll be great to have much more variety of creatures in the game. The book is, of course, nicely produced in the Pelgrane fashion. It's got a lovely binding, very solid. Nice and thick. I'm not sure of the total page count. We'll take a look at that in a minute. The promo text on the back. So it says, have your Yellow King role-playing game players grown complacent, battling gargoyles, vampires, and riot dogs? Do you have a reality horror mystery crying out for a fresh and bizarre villain to drive it? Legion of Carcosa solves your problems by helping you create some for your Belle Epoque art students, Continental War soldiers, alternate reality ex-insurgents, and ordinary people trapped in unraveling normalcy. From alien parasites to warped human conspirators, from hungry buildings to incarnations of drought, from gods torn from the pages of myth to war machines that hunt in wolf-like packs, Legion of Carcosa, the Yellow King role-playing game bestiary, presents 86 new foes to mystify, haunt, and menace your investigators. So then there's some more little teasers about what's in the book. Now, one thing I have to mention, unfortunately, there's a little bit of controversy about this regarding the book, especially given today's climate on this issue. So if you can see here on the credits page, and we'll zoom in a little bit. So the interior art created by Robin D. Laws using the Stable Diffusion AI art software. So yeah, all the art in this book is generated by AI. I don't think that's particularly great. They did write a column. Robin D. Laws wrote a column about why they chose to do this and why they thought the sort of creepy, inhuman aesthetic of AI art was better for this particular book. And I think that following discussion with the fans, the art in Black Star Magic was transferred from being more AI art to being commission paid for art as per usual. And I wonder if this was hopefully a one-off experiment, but we'll see how it goes in the future. The art in the book, I've had a peek through. I mean, it does sort of have that creepy vibe, but because it is created using software, all the art is the same size. We don't know if it incorporates aspects of other people's copyrighted work in its training, so it's a little bit dicey ethically, I would say. And also, there are lots of talented artists out there who deserve money. Having said that, Pelgrane Press is also a very small company with only one full-time employee. So, there's a balance to be struck there. They do produce wonderful products, but it's a fairly niche market, tabletop RPGs, unless you're Hasbro. And so I think we will see more companies experiment with this kind of stuff, but generally the response has been negative, I would say, from fans whenever somebody has tried this. So we'll see. I think over time, people will try to continue to fight for artists to be hired, real human artists, I should say, rather than AI to be used, but we'll see how it goes. In the table of contents, you can see they jump right into it. We've got Monsters for Paris sequence, we've got Monsters for the Wars sequence following that, then Monsters for the Aftermath, and then for This Is Normal. Now, presumably some of these would be transferable between sequences as well. The time sequence of those 4 different eras can get kind of interlinked and messed up. You may encounter some of them in unexpected ways, which would be pretty cool. And each monster actually has a 2-page spread, so you get quite a lot of description as well as the stats and the cards. The cards for each monster are given with their individual listing. So we diverge from other YKRPG products where cards all appear together at the back because you might need them in a variety of circumstances. This new approach maximizes ease of reference, although it does mean that a few cards appear more than once in this book. I think it makes sense, and I prefer it that way, honestly, to have the cards directly with the monster that needs them. So you can see there's quite a bit of description for each one, and you can see as well, like this is called the Bone Pile here, and it's animated by practitioners of Carcosan magic. Neglected human remains carelessly shunted to the catacombs become bone piles, prowling through the city's underground in roaming masses. The investigators discover them as they spread from their original resting places to both the old and new sewer systems. These amalgamations manifest as small avalanches of bones that tumble along the ground, gaining in size as they sweep stray bones and other debris into their shambling mass. They go on about more behaviors and backgrounds of this monster, and they roam the underground to try and keep building themselves up and absorbing the remains of their enemies into their mass. A kill result in combat will cause the pile of bones to temporarily lose animation, which it regains again at midnight. To permanently destroy one, you must find the site where magicians summoned it and perform a rite that undoes the spell. Usually this requires them to identify the magicians and either learn the ceremony they used in order to create a reverse version or coerce them into doing it. Often this entails unmaking a yellow sign responsible for its manifestation. Then, interestingly, we have of how we can bring these creatures into the other sequences. So there's a section about how to bring it into the wars, the aftermath, and this is normal now. And then we have their stats. So they appear one at a time. Difficulty level is superior. Escape 3, other 4, kill 6. They're quite tough to kill. And as we see, they reanimate at midnight anyway, so you need to go through a whole process to actually dispel them. Difficulty adjustments are -1 if you have a map of the catacombs, -2 if you've taken steps to bring peace to the dead. Toll is 1. They're tagged as a construct, and they have 2 unique cards. So the minor injury is it's a miracle you're alive. -1 to physical tests. After a physical failure, roll a die. On an even result, trade for the shock card Rattled, which is one of the more general ones. The other card is Massive Injuries, which counts as 2 injury cards. Until the end of the interval, you can't make tests at all. Thereafter, -2 to physical tests and -1 to focus tests. If scenario is not over at the end of the session, trade for On the Mend. So that's kind of an example of the detail of each creature entry, which I think is really good. This is, of course, our first example of Stable Diffusion AI art, and, it does look cool. It has to be said, but again, there is the ethical issues and copyright issues that go along with it. To me, it's not entirely clear. This was a great idea, and it's the only book so far in the line that does it. I don't know of any other books in other Pelgrane lines that are doing this. So maybe it's true that they just thought it was a good fit for this book when Robin was playing around with AI art, and so it'll be a one-off thing. Let's hope so. Obviously, all of these monsters have a lot of descriptions, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but they are quite unique. So, for example, this beast is actually a painting of a jungle in a dark palette of greens and yellows with several beautiful flowers and beasts among the leaves. Cursory glance reveals nothing abnormal. Hidden in the painting's shadowy tall grasses is a skulking leopard, coat weathered, muscles taut. It takes a little while of gazing at the painting to see the leopard, immersing oneself into this fantastically styled jungle world, examining each brushstroke on each post-impressionist version of a blade of grass. As soon as the leopard notices being looked at, it returns the viewer's gaze. Nobody else notices this but the person it locks eyes with. Over the next few days, the gazer begins to see the leopard where it shouldn't be. It appears in other paintings, on reflective surfaces, and in shadows that dance upon walls. Each time the target sees the leopard, it appears closer, poised, as though stalking, and eventually ready to pounce. The terrified victim constantly checks their peripheral vision for hints of movement. Finally comes the dreaded moment as the creature jumps into the victim's reality and tears them to shreds. I mean, that's pretty cool. They appear one at a time, but the way they stalk you out of the painting is pretty damn cool. The difficulty is vastly superior, so to kill them you need a 7 margin, which is pretty insane. You get a difficulty adjustment of -1 though if the target likes art, but the toll is 2, which is tough. So even if a party is taking this on, you can take a massive toll of injuries. And its injuries, minor and major, are Reality Horror, which is a shock card, so it's a mental injury, and Monstrous Mauling. So Reality Horror gives you -1 to focus test. At the end of a scene in which you take the lead in gaining a core clue from a GMC, roll a die. On an even result, discard the card. On an odd result, give this shock card to another player. So it'll pass around the circle, potentially. The major injury you can get would be Monstrous Mauling. It's -1 to test. Trade for Still Hurting by paying a price or overcoming a relevant obstacle. If still in hand at the end of the scenario, gain the card Permanent Injury, which is pretty bad. So yeah, it's a toughie, and certainly scary the way that the only one who locked eyes with it will be the only one that sees it, until eventually it tears its way into reality and attempts to maul them to death. So very cool. This art, I mean, that's very clearly AI art. You can tell from the odd mix of colors, the sort of bizarre facial shape. So this is the Dark Dweller. This is again from the catacombs in Paris. They subsist on the dark, not needing food or other sustenance. They fiercely and unrelentingly attack people or animals that come too close to their lurking spots. And they've been transformed by the dark, are pained by the light, and generally do not go into the sunniest parts of the city. And they have 2 unique cards. Through the Ringer. So +1 to all tolls, that's pretty tough. Other PCs take -1 composure penalties while inside of you. Trade for Black and Blue as recipient of difficulty 5 first aid success. Major injury would be Breaking Point, so you get +2 to tolls, even worse. For the next 6 hours of world time, other PCs take -2 composure penalties while inside of you. After 6 hours world time, trade for the injury card Black and Blue and the shock card They Broke You. Yeah, and then again we have recommendations on bringing them into other settings. And this is quite creepy here, the Dollmaker. Now again, we're going to skip through some of these. This one has quite a few unique cards as well. 2 shark cards and 3 injuries, which is pretty cool. One of them is a new one, Energy Drain, so pay 5 points from any combination of physical abilities. If you can't pay, trade for Massive Injuries, which we saw earlier. After 6 hours world time, trade for On the Mend if you're the recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid success. You get a +1 to difficulty adjustment if dolls are within sight, and -1 if you're personally scared of dolls. Then we have the Doombringers. Okay, so these are a secret group within the Gendarmes, the police of Paris. They fix their loyalties on a mightier authority, the King in Yellow, a living god. So they are corrupt cops, but corrupt in the worst possible way. And again, they can exist in any of the different sequences, depending on how you flavor them. They appear 13 at a time, which is pretty rough. With a difficulty of superior, the difficulty -1 if you trust the gendarme, +1 if you're suspicious of authority. Total of 1, and they have different sets of injury cards depending on the sequence. So you get black and blue are badly beaten for Paris, or this is normal now. Grazed and shot for the wars. Comic book zap and comic book slash for aftermath. So what's comic book zap? -4 to composure tests when in view of the yellow sign. Discard after 2 intervals. Okay. Comic book slash is -4 to composure test when in view of the yellow sign. After 2 intervals, you may discard as recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid success. Okay, so just a slightly tougher version of this one, basically. You need to get some first aid to get over it. It can be grazed, get a -1 to physical tests, or shot, so -2 to physical test, and it counts as 2 injury cards. And then you need a difficulty 6 first aid success. If still in hand at the end of the scenario, you succumb to your injuries and die. Ouch. Then we have black and blue, which gives +1 to tolls, and the more severe version, badly beaten, which gives +2 to tolls, but you can trade it for black and blue after a difficulty 4 first aid. So we have the Dollmaker before, now we have the Dressmaker. So she makes dresses that infect their wearers, making them susceptible to Claudia's suggestions. In her dreams, she imagines them acting like her little puppets on strings. In reality, the next day, they follow these commands. Over time, Claudia has learned to control this to her advantage, gaining personal wealth and revenge on those who've harmed her in the past. Claudia particularly relishes in the suffering of her puppets. The dresses whisper the victims' lies to Claudia, and she turns the facades they wear to the outside world against them. Yikes. Okay, so she's a bit twisted. A lot of difficulty superiors, I noticed. These are tended to be tough monsters. Interesting difficulty adjustments. +1 if the target doesn't wear dresses. -1 if the target is prone to nightmares. And then we have some new injury cards as well. Soul Swipe. As recipient of a dream command from the Yellow King, you must obey it, or gain the card Yellow Doom. And Yellow Doom, if still in hand after 24 hours world time, your character dies. Discard by striking a significant blow against the forces of Carcosa. There's also Slashing Needle, -1 to physical test. Discard as a recipient of a first aid spend equal to the margin of your failed fighting test. Okay, so depending on how badly you do in the fight, that will determine how much first aid you need. The major version is all sewn up, so parts of you have been sewn to other parts of you. -3 to physical test, -1 to focus and presence test. Discard 1 interval after you become the recipient of a difficulty 5 first aid success. Cool. Then we have the Gawkers. So these are appearing as everyday folks, save for their waxy skin, undifferentiated features, and vague costuming. They plunge into the throng. Cloaked by the confusion of the event and the perception-clouding powers of the yellow sign, they pick off a distracted onlooker or two, reducing them to nothingness. Okay. So they can confuse you, -1 to physical tests. They can squeeze you, -2 to physical tests. Discard on a physical failure. If still held at the end of the session, begin next session by receiving Do Not Go Forth into the Agora, which is a shock card. And in that case, you make a difficulty 4 sense trouble test every time you enter a place you've never been before. On a failure, -1 to all tests while in that location. Discard when you take an injury card in a location you are very familiar with. So they give you a sense of agoraphobia, given that they sort of spring up out of nowhere in the crowd, surround you. Difficulty is not that bad, though, evenly matched, but they come in numbers of 7 to 10 or more. The toll is minor at 1, so not particularly difficult one-on-one, but there'll be a number of them. And if you do pick up a major injury, then you'll end up with quite a difficult shot guard that'll make it annoying every time you enter a new place. I've got the Green Fairy. That looks very similar to art from Changeling the Dreaming. So these entities take on the guise of unremarkable humans, haunting the peripheries of places of energy and excitement. An investigator under the influence of absinthe with either the tipsy or intoxicated shock card in hand sees a very different scene. In their true form, their green skin constantly ripples and oozes like a tumultuous sea. Their teeth and claws stretch on for inches, looking brittle but strong as iron. So they suck on your energy, basically, giving you possibly fairy fatigue, which is a -1 to test, which you just discard at the end of the session. So that can really bring you down for the whole session, actually. Fairy drain gives you -2 to test. Discard when the green fairy dies. If still in hand at the end of the scenario, you succumb to your exhaustion and die. Okay, so that's really serious. -2 to all tests is going to be really bad. Require a lot of point spends to have any successes. And you'll need to kill the green fairy to escape this doomed condition. And there's a lot of difficulty adjustments depending on how you see them. So if you remember them in your true form but are not presently drunk, you get -1, up to -3 if you have the shock card intoxicated, +3 if they're drawing energy from you at that particular moment. And they are Carcosan entities, difficulty superior. So not great. But the Inkblot, that's interesting. Art represents the perfect greeting brown for some Carcosan species. It's passionate and weird and wild. Thread-like and about half the length of a thumbnail, Inkblots are serpentine creatures. They manifest in paint, ink, or other liquid artistic mediums, taking physical form from the amount of artistic potential the substances contain. An investigator pressing against the swelling might feel some writhing, squirming mass underneath the skin. Inkblots infect the victim with a fever, fatal if left unchecked. Those symptoms manifest like those of a normal fever. An autopsy would reveal internal organs that look like they've been burned up. They also push their victims to create more art. So they can give you a minor injury of ink infection, -X to tests, where X is the number of intervals you've gone without giving in to your artistic impulses. Okay. So you have to constantly create art, or you will get penalties. That's interesting. At the end of each interval, roll a die. On a 1, trade for ink flu, which is worse. On a 5 or higher, discard. Okay, so Ink flew, minus X to tests again. At the end of any interval, you pay 1 health and roll a die. On a 5 or 6, trade for Ink infection. If you ever get a result of 1 on this roll and still have this card at the end of the scenario, you die. So they are invasive, but have a total of 0, and they're weak. But I think detecting what's going on and correcting the situation if they do manage to infect you is going to be quite annoying. We have the Inspir, kind of an evil version of the Muse. They turn passion eventually into obsession, so victims dedicate themselves entirely to creating art that does justice to the image of the Inspir, never quite living up to their fevered expectations. They turn away food, drink, and sleep, and eschew the company of their loved ones in pursuit of the Inspir's image. Once they have sufficiently weakened, the Inspir manipulates their will for its bidding, generally violent. Those who completely give in to the Inspir's influence might find themselves painting portraits of the Inspir with their best friend's blood, or stringing a violin with their spouse's hair in order to compose a piece about the Inspir. Wow, that's dark. They can give you shock or injury cards. You can be roughed up, lose 1 composure, discard after any physical success or by spending 1 athletics pool. You can be sucker punched, lose 2 health, roll a die, and discard after that number of successes. Ooh. As far as shock cards, you can be influenced. The GM may require you to make a difficulty 5 composure test. On a failure, you take a subtly destructive, barely detectable action specified by the GM that would please the entity that gave you this card. Okay, I think this is one of the ones we have in the standard shock deck, actually. Violent impulse. After 2 more intervals, the GM specifies that you strike violently against another PC. Test fighting, spending 2 points available. PC test athletics with your results as a difficulty. Taking the injury card abrasion, laceration, scratch, or roughed up, GM chooses. After completing the action, roll a die, discarding this card on an even result. GM must wait 2 intervals before triggering the effect again. Discard when the entity, in this case the Inspir, is destroyed. So again, difficulty is evenly matched, so not too hard, but if you've made art about it, then you'll get a +4 to the difficulty to defeat it. So that could be, not straightforward. I love that all these monsters have a gradual build-up of threat. It's not just simply some tentacled monster. They are, subtle. They have different ways of infecting your mind or your body. So here we have the Liberty Vintners, a dark red wine. They've crafted ruby-colored Carcosan vines onto their withered crops to create a delicious grape imbued with reality-twisting energy. The raw grapes affect both human and animals the first time they're consumed, but like the wine, never thereafter. After the initial taste, Liberty grapes don't appear to have any effect on the quaffer. Difficulty is tough but outmatched, so you get a +1 difficulty if you're a city official, +2 if you drank a glass of vin de liberté, -1 if you're new enough not to drink, -1 if you're knowledgeable about winemaking. The total is 0. The injuries are relatively minor. You get grazed or shot, which we've seen before from the corrupt cops. But yeah, so the enemy in this case is a bottle of wine. It's very unusual. Living portraits. Living portraits are the results of the misguided attempts of a down-and-out painter, Clement Medine, to capture the success of his youth. While experimenting with new pigments and solvents to differentiate his work from that of others, Medine received a mysterious package containing yellowish turpentine. When added to his pigments, this turpentine revolutionized the quality of his work, making portraits seem to come alive. Actually, they indeed had come to life, awakened by the Carcosan chemical. So they always incorporate a subtle motif evoking the skull-like facial structure of Carcosan nobility. The turpentine-influenced portraits are dimensional gateways into pocket dimensions, positioned between this one and Carcosa. The figures in the painting are alive and think with a predator's cunning. Anyone who approaches a Madame painting feels a psychic pull drawing them close to the canvas, but you can resist that with sense trouble. To destroy a living portrait, an art student must enter the painting's pocket dimension and defeat its central figure in combat. The death of the living portrait closes the pocket dimension and frees those trapped inside. Burning or slashing the painting's canvas also destroys the creature along with its victims. So probably best to step inside then. So it can give you physical effects. With Turpentine, -1 to physical tests, health drops to 0. Wow. On a physical success, refresh health and discard this card. Snoot full of Turpentine, -1 to physical tests. You can't discard injury cards. A bit of a misprint there, unfortunately. So after seeing the painting again, second time, -1 to presence test. Discard when the painting's pocket dimension is destroyed. Or you can see Dire Visage. After seeing the painting again, -1 to all tests. Discard when the painting's pocket dimension is destroyed. Okay. The number is just 1, but the difficulty is vastly superior, so they're hard to kill. Not so difficult to escape, fortunately. If you're informed about the Turpentine, get +1 if knowing to look for the yellow sign. Total is 0, so that makes them a little bit less threatening. Then we have the Marble Dancer. So, gorgeous and androgynous marble dancer, named for its love of dancing among the living at parties of any kind. A supernatural sense guides it to the nearest dance, where incredibly lifelike illusion powers allow it to blend in with the crowd. It mimics the action on the dance floor, whatever the style. It completes the imposture with natural, if somewhat overdramatic speech and facial expressions. The sculpture always pursues one goal, to find someone who can love it. If the sculpture can do this, it becomes a flesh and blood human. Transformation comes at a price. Over many nights, it drains its lover's life force, prematurely aging them. When that human dies, the dancer returns to his pedestal, a marble statue once more. Wow. So it sounds like hell for the statue itself as well. Quite a few injury cards. So you can get a Shattering Blow or a Smashing Blow. Dazed, which we've seen before as well. Stolen Years, that's a new one. Roll a die. On an odd, permanently lose 1 point from your health rating. But you can trade that for, you potentially get On the Mend, -1 to all tests. Trade for Still Hurting on a physical success. Okay. Yeah, so that's what you trade down to On the Mend from Shattering Blow. We haven't seen that before. Appear one at a time. Difficulties evenly matched. And +1 if you get the dancer to open up to you about its true nature. Very interesting. But given the illusion magic, I imagine it'd be quite hard to find out that the statue is in fact a marble statue and not a living being when you encounter it, and it seems to be speaking to you. I can see a lot of interesting story threads evolving from these monsters. This, again, clearly AI art from the style, but it actually looks pretty cool, I have to admit. So, she's a well-known artist in Paris, creating haunting portraits and surreal swirling yellow tinted oil paints. So she invites people to her home studio instead of sharing them with the public, and she holds exclusive parties for elite buyers who cherish the strange and unusual. And she regales her drug-addled guests with snippets of The King in Yellow. Her mind obsessively recounts the imagery, rhetoric, and poetry of the chaotic alien text, as though she becomes momentarily possessed of a train of thought she cannot control. The verses become implanted in the minds of her listeners, and this recitation slowly erodes their minds, until there's nothing left but the words from the play. So if you're taking part in one of her soirees, you have to make a difficulty 4 composure test to avoid the shocks, warped perceptions, and waking nightmare. She can also do physical injury in the form of soul decay and black tears. So soul decay, you lose 1 composure. At the end of each interval, roll a die. On an odd, lose 1 composure. Again, discard on a success that aids you against a supernatural entity. Black Tears, however, all PCs take -1 to tests. Effects of multiple Black Tears cards do not stack, thankfully. Discard by contributing to the defeat of a War Spawn or Carcosa. You can also get Warp Perceptions, -1 to focus test. Discard by menacing an innocent bystander or destroying a valuable property that doesn't belong to you. Or Waking Nightmare, -2 to focus test. After gaining information from an interpersonal ability other than steal or intimidate, you may roll a die after threatening, attacking, or otherwise alienating the witness. On an even, discard the card. So you've got a vastly superior difficulty. -1 difficulty if you're terrified of losing control or altered substances, or +1 if altered substances are normal for you. Toll is 2, which is quite severe. And Black Tears, that's pretty scary because that affects the entire party. And the shock cards are rough as well because you need to basically injure or intimidate innocent bystanders or destroy things, which is not what you really want to be doing in this game. The Mycar animated gargoyles with obsidian-like skin, differentiating it from an animated gargoyle. It retains the sheen after the creature is slain. When stretched onto a frame and used as a mirror, the beholder can wash it with blood to scry into the past. Investigators attempting this might catch a glimpse of an important moment that has already occurred, either in Carcosa or on Earth. Seeing into Carcosa requires a difficulty 4 composure test to avoid shocks, minor and major, tremors, and hackles raised. Alright, so they give some ideas about how to work it into a story. Of course, the other sequences as well. Difficulty is superior, but they only appear 1 at a time, thankfully. -1 difficulty if you've seen visions in Mycar skin, +1 if the Mycar is doing the bidding of a Carcosa noble, and +1 if characters have encountered an animated gargoyle and mistake the Mycar for one. They haven't noticed the obsidian sheen. That could make it harder for you to fight them. A Mycar scratch will give you a -1 to physical tests. A failure with a margin of 2 or more shatters the afflicted body part. Ooh. It becomes a continuity tag. Discard at the end of the next interval if not a continuity card. Discard by using Mycar Salve, the antidote you can gain during investigation in the current scenario. A Mycar Bite, a major injury. Each time you make a physical test, roll a die. On an odd, your body crystallizes and shatters, killing you. Discard by using Mycar Salve. For the shock cards, you get the Tremors, -1 to presence. Discard by going to a scary location. Or discard by initiating an encounter with a scary person, creature, or entity. Or Hackle Raised, the major version. Pay 1 health or composure each time a player character, including you, attempts a sense trouble test. Trade for the Tremors when your health and composure pools both equals 0. The instant death from Mycar Bite, that's pretty harsh. That's pretty bad. Difficulty is superior, at least they only appear 1 at a time. They are fightable, much like the animated gargoyles in the main game, but yeah, that Mycar Bite is some serious business. And then we have the Knock, very obviously AI art. It's a little bit too shiny and oddball. This is an intelligent aquatic predator called the Knock that swims in corrupted bodies of water. Its mutant form, highly variant between individuals, chaotically combines piscine, crustacean, and hominid anatomical features. The Knock's malevolent aura interferes with human visual perception, causing onlookers to exaggerate the anthropomorphic elements of its appearance. Feeds on human flesh, luring its victims to a watery death. It's fiercely intelligent with razor-sharp teeth and knows how to escape most fishing traps and nets. So to safely deal with it, one must lure it out of the river by presenting it with the food it prefers, living human flesh. You can have the injury cards Poseidon Wrath, non-lethal. You can't make pushes, -2 to all tests except preparedness. Discard when you leave the boat. Or you can have Bitten, -1 to physical test. Discard, receive a difficulty 4 first aid success, then make a physical test. As with all these tests, they have to be story relevant. You can't just declare to the GM, look, I really need a physical test to discard this card. There has to be something sort of organically occurring through the storyline. The total is 2 in Aftermath. That's interesting, otherwise 1. They're a mutant. Difficulty in Aftermath is vastly superior and superior in all other sequences. So in Aftermath, they appear to be stronger. Interesting. Then we have Our Lady of Bones. That's nice and creepy. I like that one. A lesser-known saint whose likeness is memorialized in Notre Dame. She raised Lazarus from the dead or saved St. Peter from his torturous upside-down crucifixion. In their minds, this miracle worker has always been an important part of the Catholic faith, and many humans venerate her gray-clad personage as God's left hand. Research turns up not a single textual reference to her, aside from a pamphlet or 2 printed only this year. Belief in this saint began only months ago. Neither martyr nor human, Our Lady of Bones is a Carcosan humanoid able to shape a mortal's perception of death. She weaves lies and manipulates people's emotions to further her goal to be worshipped as a god. She reveals herself to the recently grief-stricken, cloaked in pallid light. Her presence triggers an intense hallucination that people of faith interpret as a holy vision. She promises a boon, typically the resurrection of the deceased, in exchange for a sacrifice or the execution of a task. Whatever the bargain, she never fulfills her end of it. For weeks afterward, her illusions continue to edit victims' perceptions. The living appear to shamble about like rotting corpses. The undead, including the ghosts and zombies she employs as messengers and minions, appear healthy and corporeal. Wow, okay, and she can use zombies and ghosts and others as a means to pass messages from her own mouth. She can manifest player characters in mourning, in which case they need difficulty 4 composure successes to avoid shocks minor and major, which in this case are Whispers of the Grave. -1 to focus test, you perceive the undead as vital and alive and the living as undead. Discard when the entity responsible for the shock is destroyed. Or the major version command of the Grave, -1 to focus tests. Again, you perceive the undead as vital and alive and the living as undead. When you do the bidding of the entity responsible for the shock, roll a die. On an even, trade for Whispers of the Grave. Oh, that's tough. So you got a 50-50 chance of discarding it and trading down, but you could potentially have to do a number of tasks for Our Lady of Bones in order to get free of this and down to Whispers of the Grave, which then you have to deal with by destroying her completely. Difficulty is overwhelming as well. Kill 8, others 7. +2 adjustments in Aftermath. +2 also if you're mourning a loved one. +1 if you played your character as devoutly Christian. -2 if you prayed to her, and -4 if you've offered a sacrifice to her. And the total is 3. Okay, so she is probably more for the experienced party who know how to work together and to overcome these kinds of pervasive, illusionist, mind-twisting threats. Pan, so we know him from classical myth, but the reality-twisting energies of Carcosa have conjured Syrinx and her unwanted lover into physical being. So then, although Pan claims otherwise, Syrinx is a living, breathing, conscious set of flutes with a mind and heart of her own. Affectionate to music aficionados and musicians alike, and can communicate with her chosen guardian through music capable of expressing complex emotions. She currently performs at Le Chat Noir. The audience experiences her as a captivating instrument played by in-house musicians. When they research the Greek myth either in the library or university, they'll discover the truth and are free to confront Pan for his crimes. On confronting this, you can end up with 2 different shot cards, Enthralled or Influence, which we've seen before. Difficulty is overwhelming again, so not to be messed with, and a total of 3, and it's tagged as a conjureling. So yeah, it's been brought into being by the energies of Carcosa, so I suppose that's why. +2 difficulty if you won't do what Pan asks, +1 if you know Pan is lying to you, -2 if you're a musician, or -1 if Pan believes you're helping him. Alright. Picture perfect. Okay. So these arise from the interaction of Carcosan emanations and the collective belief in the importance of artistic giants. When Earth people fixate upon the works of a dead artist, writer, or similarly celebrated figure, they unwittingly will into existence a lingering shade of the departed great. So the shade then appears to the individuals who help manifest them, individualized according to the subject's vision of them. So when they manifest, they can seek a corporeal form, which you can gain by finding a willing human to be permanently possessed. While occupying a physical body, the picture perfect looks like the possessed individual to those unfamiliar with the artist, and as the artist to those who know their work. Physical bodies start to wear out after a few months, requiring the picture perfect to groom and jump into new victims on a regular basis. So you can defeat them when they're in a physical body. They can give you shock damage or injury damage. So in a physical form, they can give you a superhuman blow or a superhuman smash, which we've seen in the core cards. Or you may get enthralled or develop an alien passion. You love the entity responsible for your taking this card and may not act against its interests as you reasonably understand them. Discard when the entity is destroyed, not by you, of course. Difficulty is not that high. If corporeal, it's tough but outmatched. So difficulty to kill is only 4. The difficulty adjustment is +2 since the last time you met it, assuming it's gained more followers in the meantime. A global phenomenon like the Risen Tupac might be vastly superior or overwhelming. Alright, Pigment. They're a subversive group of oil paint manufacturers who want to destroy the aristocracy by forcing the social elite to humiliate themselves and fall into disgrace. Oil paint manufacturers have discovered the means to blend naturally sourced pigments and linseed oil with plants, animals, and objects from Carcosa to create tainted paint. When the paint dries, the viewer may experience one of several effects depending on which colors were used. Red paint induces a frenzied, Dionysian state. Yellow causes nightmares of the king in yellow. Blue lulls the viewer into a deep sleep. And Pigment hires painters to wax poetically about color theory to the elite, then paints their target's portrait in a private session using these colors. Once the paint dries, Pigment uses a slim window of opportunity to ruin the aristocrat's fortune, reputation, or political standing. So from these guys, you can end up muzzy-headed. Lose 1 point from all presence pools. At the end of the next interval, regain those points and discard the card. Or you can be sedated. Lose 2 points from all presence pools. Wake up 3 hours later in a place and circumstance of the foe's choosing, at which point you discard this card. They are vastly superior in difficulty. +1 difficulty adjustments if you're a painter, +1 if you've used the paint. -1 if the squad has analyzed the ingredients, and -2 if you've done business with them before. But the total is 2, which is not nothing. You have Silver Sirens. Unspectacular piece of art there. You can see it's quite pixelated as well. They can claw you, -2 to all tests, or eviscerate you, which counts as 2 injuries. If 6 hours pass where you can't make physical tests, then you can trade for on the mend if you receive a difficulty 6 first aid success. After 12 hours, the difficulty of that test drops to 4. Again, they're vastly superior. So clearly this is the Carcosan infected version of the Sirens of Legend. Unknown of the Seine, the famous river in Paris. So this was the enigmatic face of the corpse of an anonymous young woman found on the riverbank. A plastic cast of the errant suicide victim became the new epitome of feminine beauty, causing artists in the elite of the city to use copies of this mask when decorating their salons, studios, and boudoirs. The body that had appeared was in fact that of a Carcosan, one of the first to enter Paris at the behest of the Yellow King. Hoping to increase her power across the city, this malevolent being orchestrated her own elevation to iconic status by hypnotizing that same mortician who made the first death mask. Now that mask and all the subsequent molds of it contains the copied consciousness of the Carcosan. The masks that are distributed across the households of Paris elites act as convenient spy equipment as the unknown listens on the happenings and conversations of the city's intelligentsia. Ooh, that's very interesting. I like that. But she can also do enervating touch and enervating strike, so there is a bit of a physical element if you encounter the mask personally. Of course, I like that if this is normal now, it could be a new smart home appliance called Amber, which has the real holographic projection of an AI face. She shapes public consciousness in favor of your antagonist's yellow sign policy agenda. And of course, we get enthralled in alien passion again because of her iconic status and being the epitome of feminine beauty. Madame Cleo Verlac. So she was more than a simple seance performer. She maintains a distance from proper society, and her seances are popular enough to keep fueling her power. She always accepts the invitation of someone who's recently had heartbreak, loss, or other devastating life change. She accurately recognizes these vulnerable souls, promising them revelatory truths only her seance could offer. She always visits them at their home, so her home remains secret. She speaks lines from the play, which is always a bad thing. These alien words embed dark ideas in the attendees' subconscious minds, compelling them to commit murder, cheat on their loved ones, or end their suffering through suicide. Lovely. Again, we got vastly superior. She knows her business and is good at evading pursuers. She can give you a scratched psyche as an injury, -1 to focus test. Discard as recipient of an occultism spend, by taking a risk or paying a cost to locate a healing incantation in a rare grimoire. Or a poison psyche, you can't discard shock cards. Ooh. Discard by discovering and successfully performing the ritual that permanently kills the entity that did this to you. At the end of the scenario, roll a die. On a 1 to 2, this becomes a continuity card, so it carries on. Shock cards, you can get Soul Shook. Lose 1 health each time you make a presence test, and if your health is 0, lose 1 athletics. Discard after scoring a presence success with a margin of 3 or more. Or Incipient Possession. Lose 1 composure each time you make a focus test. If caught undermining the group's investigation, which you must make a genuine effort to conceal from them, roll a die, and on an even result, discard. We have the Wanderer. That's pretty cool. That skull is a bit misshapen. Again, an artifact of AI art. A lot of that's improved now, I think, since this book was originally put together and very recently. So in appearance, the Wanderer resembles an effete, stylish man about town, decked out in top hat and in coat. And the defining feature of a Carcosan-influenced Wanderer, and its appearance comes into clearer view beneath the top hat, a skull mask. One might easily imagine a wanderer in the guise of a woman, clad in a fashionable, mysteriously flowing gown, velvet topcoat and plumed hat, with a skull mask in porcelain or silver. It slips in and out of a quasi-dimension, a place of endless alleyways and corners and doorways that shift according to inhuman physics. Rather than attack its victims, the wanderer reels them through disorientation and distraction from a distance. It gladly engages in conversation, using hypnotic words to seize a psychic hold of its targets. So it can hit you with its sword cane. So a minor cane blow will give you, just at each new interval, roll a die, or on an even discard. Sword cane stab, you lose 1 health each time you make a physical test, and need a difficulty 4 first aid success to discard. If it's still in hand at the end of the scenario, you die from your stab wound. Well, if you roll an odd on a die. Shock cards are interesting. You got Rue de Halle. Anytime you move through the city alone on foot, roll a die. On an odd, you enter a dreamlike version of the city, exiting 1 to 6 hours later in circumstances that imperil you or your investigation. Rue de Hastur, shock. Anytime you move through the city, roll a die. Odd, you enter a dreamlike version of the city, exiting 1 to 6 hours later in circumstances that imperil you or your investigation. So this is when you're alone on foot, whereas this time, anytime you move through the city whatsoever. So that's pretty bad. However, it's not so difficult to defeat. It appears in numbers of 1 and evenly matched, but due to its charm and conversational abilities, it could easily suck you in if you don't pass the requisite composure tests. So watch out for that. We have the Widowmaker. That's pretty creepy. So this is the aristocrat Sebastian Beaumont for his deep melancholy and moody outbursts at parties. He falls hard into love. His sadness attracts lovers who want to help or fix him. His genuinely beautiful romantic gestures mask his deeper problems in an illusion of wondrous affection. Over the years, one by one, his lovers have all died suddenly and tragically. This terrible pattern only adds to his deepest depression. The most tragic thing of all is that he doesn't know he's the one killing them. Society nicknames him the Widowmaker. Conservative-minded peers shun him, a heedless few find his tragedy a romantically mysterious entertainment for their gatherings. Poor guy. So he just gives you rather simple injuries if you encounter him, but he's pretty tough. Difficulty superior. +1 difficulty if you're attracted to dark, handsome, mysterious men. -1 if you're a survivor of abuse. You can recognize the bad signs in him, I suppose. The injury cards are just sedated and blow to the head, so these are repeats of what we've seen before. Got the Winter Worm, a scourge of densely populated cities. The parasitic entity can temporarily assuage the hunger, thirst, and pain of their hosts, causing them to waste away while in a state of euphoria. To achieve the psychic link necessary to do this, they engage in an illusionary swindle, presenting themselves as healers or clerics, gaining false assent to their feeding. Resembling flatworms, they attach themselves to willing humans like a pale white scarf made of flesh. Hosts become vessels for their offspring, growing in bulbous sacs of tissue on the spine. When the sacs burst, thousands of filament-like winter worms wriggle away in search of new hosts, although the tiny worms can collectively defend itself as a wave-like swarm entity if threatened. Well, that's really gross. Really gross. I don't like that. Can give you the injury cards Unwell, losing 1 health at the end of each interval roll. Die. On an odd, lose another health. Discard as recipient of difficulty 3 first aid success. So it has stats for a swarm of winter worms. They're relatively weak. The difficulty is +4 if one is attached to you, +1 if you're suffering from ill health, +2 if you don't see it coming. You can also be dazed, which is -1 to all tests for the rest of the session. The Yellow Carnation. That's interesting. We get some yellow signs mixed in amongst these carnation flowers here. So they're considered common weeds in their native Carcosa, and most who wear the flowers suffer no ill effects. Only those already prone to decadence and decay to fall prey to it. They inject a seed into the susceptible victim's chest. Affected GMCs accelerate their debauchery, damaging health and reputation. Alcoholics drink more, the carefree take greater risks. Libertines abandon all for the pleasures of the flesh. All the while, the carnation's foul roots spread throughout their host body, draining them of vitality. But they are flowers, so they're not that tough. But difficulty is +1 if the PC has recently indulged in bohemian excess. They do shock or injury damage. I like the new shock cards. We've got Seeded. Declining bohemian indulgence requires a difficulty 4 composure test. Discard as the recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid success from a PC who has learned the cure to your weird condition. If still in hand after 3 hours game time, trade for Pollinator. So Pollinator, when another PC indulges in bohemian excess in your presence, roll a die. On an odd, that PC gains the shock card Seeded. Ooh, that's insidious. So if you don't manage to figure out what's going on, and they don't learn a cure in time, you can become a pollinator and start seeding your whole party with this insidious growth from Carcosa. That's quite cool. So here we have the Monsters of the Wars. So we have Angels of Mons, rumors of giant radiant beings trouncing forces across Europe. They appear as angelic visions, and they can give you It's a Miracle You're Alive or Massive Injuries, which you've seen before. Angelic Vision, part of you believes that the war machine you saw was really an angel. You speak and act accordingly, discard when shown proof that it isn't. Somebody has to dissuade you of this illusion for you to discard the card. Angelic Apparition, you fervently believe that the war machine you saw was really an angel. You speak and act accordingly. When shown proof that it isn't, roll a die. And then on even you discard. So it's a 50-50 chance that you'll discard it, even when shown definitive proof. Tend to appear 3 at a time. The difficulty is overwhelming, so kill of 8. Difficulty adjustments are +1 if you believe the rumors, -1 if you've expressed skepticism of their alleged angelic nature. There are war spawn with a total of 3. Tough opponent on the battlefield. Bloodfield. Torture, murder, and death leave indelible stains on the souls of survivors and are now mutating war-torn lands imbued with Carcosan radiation. Each blade of grass, each wildflower, each frog, worm, and snake that emerges from a bloodfield are not a naturally occurring phenomenon. They are made entirely of bright red blood. They attack by absorbing more blood. Their red flora and fauna attack living humans and animals to shred flesh and cause victim to bleed. A secondary effect triggers powerful homicidal urges in humans who blood spawns one of these entities. So you can get Red Rage and Blood Rage as new shock cards. So spend 1 composure or attack the nearest person you see with the intent to kill. Other PCs can restrain you by spending 1 athletics. Discard after you launch the attack or are restrained from doing so. That's Red Rage. Blood Rage, the more major version. Every time a new person comes within rifle range of you, spend 1 composure or attack that person with the intent to kill. Other PCs can restrain you by spending 2 athletics. Discard as the recipient of an appropriate interpersonal push or difficulty 4 morale success. Interesting. Taste of Carcosa on the physical side will give you -1 to physical tests. Discard by taking the antidote to the substance which you may need to discover. Or the major version, Bloodfield Symbiotes. Discard by taking the antidote to the substance which you may need to discover. If still in hand at the end of the scenario, you die, disgorging a blood field which then attacks someone nearby. Difficulty is vastly superior. Difficulty +2 if you're a soldier or veteran, +4 if you murdered someone, +6 if you can't stand the sight of blood. -1 if you're a scientist, or -2 if you're in a vehicle. Control of 2 as well. Wow, they're pretty hardcore. They can make you do some pretty horrible things as well. Then we got the Blood Sanctum. Carnivorous, sapient, Carcosan beings known as Blood Sanctums wait for victims among the ruined landscapes of the war. Once victims step inside it, a Blood Sanctum manipulates them, demanding violence. The greater the time spent within its walls, the more susceptible victims become. The influence of Carcosa is infecting a place that seems like a sanctuary or a haven of safety for you. Pervades its influence upon you and makes you want to kill people. So constricting fixtures on the physical side, you get -1 to physical tests and roll a die. Spend health equal to the result to discard. As a result of a difficulty 5 first aid success, trade for on the mend. Architectural digestion. Counts as 2 injuries, you can't make tests. After a day, world time, roll a die. On an even, trade for on the mend. On an odd, trade for constricting fixtures, which you then would have to trade down again. And you can get influence or violent impulse, which we've seen before. Difficulty is overwhelming. Difficulty +1 each time you've entered the Blood Sanctum, +2 if human blood has been spilled inside it within the past week. -1 if you're expecting the building to turn into a creature, -1 if you know who put it there, and -1 if you already know what a Blood Sanctum is. But the total is 3 as well, so I guess it's hard to defeat a building. Makes sense. Ooh, that's pretty nasty. Caged Horror. This is Carcosan fear-seeking technology, injecting individuals with fear-inducing drugs, trapping them in cages outside of potential targets. Military scientists working for the top-secret Project Deimos have created effective decoys. Now unable to experience any emotion other than abject terror, Caged Horrors project such a strong psychic aura of fear that they act as effective decoy targets for enemy seeker technology. They can injure you with their raking claws, -1 to physical test, lose 2 health. Discard as recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid success. Or Savage Mauling, -2 to physical test, lose 2 health, trade for precarious recovery as recipient of difficulty 5 first aid success. They can also give you the Contagious Fear as a shock card, -X to presence test, where X is the number of shock cards held by the other player whose surname comes next to yours in alphabetical order. Ooh, that's an interesting one. Contagious Terror. All players take a penalty to presence test equal to the number of shock cards you hold. On a failed presence test, roll a die, and then on an even, trade for Contagious Fear. Wow, that's rough. So War Spawn, vastly superior difficulty. We've got something grotesque here. A seat. So it makes its way inside the human body, up to the victim's optical center, and eats away one of the eyes, replacing the eye with its body. Oh, that's why. So what happens then? So you get sit infected, discard as a recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid success. If not discarded after a week, world time, trade for Seeing Sits. Seeing Sits, injury, -2 to focus test. At the end of each interval, succeed on a difficulty 4 sense trouble to test or react to an ordinary event as if something hideous and otherworldly is happening. Discard as the recipient of a difficulty 5 first aid success. Failure with a margin of 2 or more, and the sit retreats into your brain and you die at the end of the scenario. Oh my god. So it's treated as a hazard rather than as a creature. That's interesting. Paul Dasté, a successful weapons maker before the war. He's originally motivated by greed, but the more people his weapons killed, the more susceptible he was to Carcosan influence, as you would expect. His factory workers are mindless slaves to the construction of his killing machines. He is expanding his manufacturing enterprise into 3 new locations. The weapons are horrific, unleashing new terrors on the battlefields. New designs latch onto their users like parasites, driving them to mindless acts of killing. Alright, so he's basically in service to the Yellow King and making terrible weapons. You can be grazed or shot, which you've seen before. Worse than it looks. On the next physical test, you fail by 1, discard this card, and succeeded the test with a margin of 0. Thoroughly perforated, -2 to test. As recipient of first aid success, difficulty 5, roll a die. On an even, trade for worse than it looks. On an odd, trade up for shot up good. You can also get a magic weapon or a cursed weapon. -1 to present test, +1 to fighting test. When you destroy the object that gave you this card, roll a die. Discard it on an even result. A cursed weapon, -2 to presence and focus test, but +2 to fighting. Discard by destroying the place where the object that gave you this card was made. So the weapons themselves can do bad things to you. Then we have the Drought Lord, a living embodiment of drought. Their activity is easy to spot through aerial photography, where perfectly circular earthworks often appear overnight. When roused to defend themselves, their true forms can be glimpsed, 10 to 12 feet in height. They take on distorted humanoid shapes. Sapient, if limited in outlook and perspective, Drought Lords can communicate by throwing their thoughts into nearby human minds. They may bargain with prospective victims, offering to spare them in exchange for obedience. Human servitors assist them by driving off interlopers and capturing victims for them to suck dry. And they can give you the minor injury Parched, lose 1 health each interval, trade for Dried Up when or if health pool equals 0, discard as a recipient of a difficulty 3 health success after consecutive 12 hours of world time on an IV drip. Wow, so you're really parched. If you're Dried Up, you can't even make physical tests, counts as 2 injuries. You can only discard when the entity that did this to you is destroyed or banished. Commandant Dupuis, so he's a man of average stature. He's led the 3rd Battalion of the 4th Infantry Division to a series of impressive victories. In the presence of his quarters, the facade slips away, manic energy overcomes him as he deviously writes forged letters throughout the night without a blink of sleep. The letters contain information he can't possibly know, yet still his hand guides the fountain pen across the page. He relays information from all sides of the war, attempting to set up rendezvous, negotiation, potential peace summits, supply exchanges, battalion movements, and the like. With twisted glee, he devises schemes to lure forces on both sides into unexpected, deadly confrontations where no one emerges victorious. Every death brings him closer to a glorious sinecure in Carcosa, or so the promise goes. The next day, Dupuis goes about his business, betraying no knowledge of the letter he penned. And he can give you the physical injuries recovering or shot up good, which we've seen before. He's a relatively normal guy, so I think this is more about the mysteries of trying to track down who's writing these letters and these forgeries that are about knowledge nobody could possibly have. We've got Earworms, again clearly quite AI-driven, just the way these shapes interconnect and the repetitive nature of them, it gives me that vibe. A small creature that burrows through a person's inner ear and implants himself in the brain, causing audio-visual hallucinations. When a host discusses these hallucinations with another person, that person becomes infected with spores excreted from the host's body, and these quickly grow into new earworms. Hallucinations take the form of odd, otherworldly creatures, and they spread plague-like through military forces. So the only physical aspect of the earworm is the worm itself. Successfully removing an earworm from a GMC in pristine conditions requires a difficulty 5 first aid success, add 1 to the difficulty if in the field. So it'll only give you shock cards, -1 to focus test for unearthly sound, -1 to focus test when you correctly identify the origin of the sounds, roll a die, and on an even discard. Melted perceptions, roll a die when you receive this card, on an odd, -1 to focus test, on an even, -1 to presence test. Discard as recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid success. And again, this is treated as a hazard, like the seat or Keach, or whatever you say. Forget Me Not. This is the war eating young lives. The cycle of violence embeds itself in the very ground, a ground thick with blood and Carcosan energy. When the earth accrues enough of this energy, Forget Me Not spawns. It's less of a creature than an echo buried beneath the earth. When soldiers set up camp nearby, it chooses a victim from the group, generally the one riven by internal turmoil. So, Forget Me Not influence. That's a new one. -1 to focus tests. Every interval, make a difficulty 3 composure test. Failure, you go to the Forget Me Not's location, trading for Forget Me Not capture. Discard the second time you score a success on the composure test. Interesting. Forget Me Not capture, you can't take tests or make pushes or do anything other than stand frozen. If multiple players get this card simultaneously, each rolls a die. The low roller keeps the card and the others discard. Reroll ties. Discard if another player receives Forget Me Not capture. Discard when the Forget Me Not is destroyed. So this one is actually a war spawn, so it can be defeated, but it can also inflict physical injury with Lash and Mouthful of Quicksand, which gives you -2 to test, lose 4 health. Discard at the end of the interval, regaining 2 health, or after 2 intervals, regaining 4 health. Okay. Furious Banes. Attacks committed by soldiers against innocent folks draw the Banes to them. As the crime occurs, the Banes appear suddenly from the shadows in which they were lurking all along. Dead eyes open through part of a wall, rock, or tree, then a figure emerges from the solid matter. The furious Banes scream in anger at those committing war crimes, swiftly and brutally murdering all involved. Screaming is relentless while blood and flesh flies around the supernaturally fast and strong creatures. Yeah, okay, so they can appear 1 to 15 in numbers. Difficulty overwhelming, +3 difficulty if you're a murderer, -1 if an atrocity is currently being committed, with a total of 2. They give you shredded flesh, a minor injury. Spend points on any athletics, fighting, or battlefield test. You must also spend 1 health point. Discard as recipient of difficulty 4 first aid. Am I still in one piece? You can't make physical tests, -1 to focus. You can't walk, okay? Trade for shrapnel as recipient of a difficulty 5 first aid success. Wow, so it's pretty vicious. I guess fitting punishment for a war criminal. Oh, that's creepy. Gut Gobler. Predatory Carcosan entity gains occult sustenance from the act of devouring the entrails of sapient beings and emotional satisfaction from the attention of a circle of sycophants. Most often posed as a prophet or village wise woman. Looks like a grotesque, impossibly old human with a face that appears unpleasantly pallid in certain lighting conditions. You might discover the existence of a gut gobbler by finding disappearances of bodies from the battlefield, reports of dancing or singing corpses, a village that refuses to house or provision loyalist forces bolstered by oddly efficacious folk magic, or a farmer offering eerily precise prophetic intelligence as supplied by the gut gobbler in exchange for supplies. Difficulty is superior, there's only 1 at a time. Difficulty is +1 if it taunts you while eviscerating a corpse, +1 if you witness one of its corpse performances, and -1 if you know what it is. It can give you a bayonet wound or a gutted, so lose 4 health. You can't take tests or make pushes or do anything but lying on the ground bleeding out, and trade down for stab wound if you get difficulty 5 first aid. If you're still in hand at the end of the scenario, you succumb to your injuries and die. Leather leg, what the hell is that? Some kind of typewriter on legs? It's almost Monty Python-esque, a little bit comedic. Okay, military technologists intended to merely extend the range of boat-wired transmissions, but watched transfixed horror as the war machines transformed into hunched, self-aware beings with a lupine stance. Survivors of the ensuing bloodbath have been spirited away to a secure hospital, where squad members might find them and learn the origin of these menaces. They can slice and dice you, they can skin you alive, can perform physical tests, -2 to focus and presence. After 1 day of world time, as difficulty 6 first aid recipient, trade for slice and diced. If still held at the end of the scenario, you die. Also be witness to carnage, -1 to all tests, discard as recipient of a push, explain why that push would help with this, okay? You can be unnerved, which you just discard by using an investigative ability, or there's a skin seeker card, -1 to all tests. Tests take a penalty equal to the number of shock cards you hold. Discard by taking time to fashion, and in front of other PCs, wear a mask from the skin of a chicken, duck, or pig. Your players roll a die, on even, they gain the shock card unnerved. Yeah, that sounds about right. The little one, see those hands, that's definitely AI art. Quite unnerving, I have to say. Shapeshifters posing as children whose parents have been killed off by war, starvation, or other tragedies. They are at their weakest while in human guise, and they spawn from a single drop of blood from a Carcosan princess. As such, they owe undying loyalty to either Casilda or Camilla. They can rake you with their claws or maul you savagely. You can be overwhelmed, so roll a die before any test. On an odd, lose 1 point from the ability being tested. Discard when you get a core clue. Pervasive distrust, so you lose 3 composure each time another investigator makes an interpersonal push. Discard by throwing a punch at a GMC who seems to be up to something. Interesting. I don't like that art. Grosses me out. The Pestox, a diseased rat-like creature, spreads dormant centuries-old diseases. Okay, so you can get stay by the water closet. Non-lethal, you must remain within proximity of a water closet. -2 to tests. After 4 hours of world time, you make a difficulty 4 health test at the beginning of any interval, discarding the card on any success. You can also get ructious innards. Non-lethal, you must remain within proximity of a water closet. You can't make tests. After 6 hours, you make a difficulty 4 health test, discarding on a success and losing 3 health on a failure. You can also get muscle cramps. -1 to tests. Roll a die. After any failure, paying a health equal to the result to discard. If the result exceeds your available health, trade for rapid dehydration, and that occurs when your health drops to 0. Trade for days, a recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid. If still held at end of scenario, you die. They are a mutant. Difficulty is superior, despite them being just a weird rat. -1 difficulty first raid rating exceeds 3. -3 if you're trying to drown it in alcohol. Interesting. Red eyes. So they manifest as disembodied pair of glowing scarlet-covered eyes hovering over the battlefield. It appears when the first shot is fired. Some say it foretells which victim will be claimed next. Others believe the eyes belong to a long-forgotten god. No one has been able to capture the eyes, either in a painting or photograph. No one remembers if they belong to any one person or creatures. Soldiers who see the eyes suffer nightmares so draining they are eventually led in a sleep-deprived state to death by battlefield misadventure. So it is a sentient creature. It can appear anywhere it chooses on the battlefield or in a victim's mind. It cannot be attacked with bullets or cannon fire. So it can give you Nightmare Blade. Roll a die. 1 to 2, you get a -1 to focus test. 3 to 4, -1 to physical test. On a 5 to 6, -1 to present test. Discard by gaining information about the entity from another or its victims. Or a Nightmare Strike. Roll a die again. Same results as before, but you get -2, -2, and -3, respectively. As recipient of a relevant interpersonal push or difficulty 4 morale success, trade for a Nightmare Blade. Difficulty 2, Awful to Contemplate. Kill 10. Escape 5, other 8. -1 difficulty if you know the eyes are Carcosan. +1 if you killed a human during the current scenario. +1 for each shock card you hold. -4 if you piece together the special way of killing it contained in the victim's nightmares. Interesting. Then we have the Rot. Ooh, that's very gross. We've got bits of corpses wrapped up in it. Caked in mud, permanently damp, enduring constant trauma, and without sufficient rations. Soldiers of the Continental War suffer in body and mind. That sort of suffering leaves a residue, and the residue is stirred into something almost lifelike by the Carcosan conflict taking place across the landscape of Europe. The supernatural whirlwind picks up all the muck and waste and infection until it becomes the Rot, a great shambling, hulking beast. Mild infection, lose 1 health point every day, world time you're infected. Make a difficulty 4 health test. Difficulty increases every 2 days. On a failure, trade for rotting from the inside. Discard if the difficulty drops below 2 or as the recipient of a difficulty 5 first aid test. Rotting from the inside, you lose 1 health point every physical test. Count as 2 injury cards. Discard as the recipient of a difficulty 5 first aid. Still in hand at the end of the session, you succumb to the infection and die. Difficulty is superior, but thankfully they only appear 1 at a time. +1 if you currently have any open wounds, +2 if it manifested from your trenches, -2 if you're fighting with weapons that have a sanitizing or cauterizing effect, and it counts as a war spawn. Got the Silent Doctor. Ooh, it's kind of an alien-esque version of a Plague Doctor mask. They might first appear as a figure in the fog to a soldier keeping watch. After that, they choose their timing carefully. They lurk in corners or at a remove, never quite in focus, never quite close enough for the victims to confront. All the while, they focus their anxious energy on the victim. The victim's paranoia spikes whenever a Silent Doctor makes an appearance. The victims alienate themselves from those around them with paranoid behavior, always talking about the feeling that something is watching them. Play elaborate games to lure soldiers from their post. When the victim goes AWOL, wandering away from comrades to a suitably secluded spot, Silent Doctor leaps on them and devours them. Again, a very scary, slow breakdown of its sanity, and they give you shock cards of Racing Pulse, lose 1 health each time you attempt a physical test, discard after your next physical success, or Rampant Mistrust, -1 composure test against mental hazards, discard by making a false alarm that creates a risk for any player character. So you have to undermine your own people, your own squad. Difficulty is evenly matched. -1 if you know there's flesh under that metal, -1 if you made a point of looking for a vulnerable spot, and +2 if you already have a shock card. Yikes. Soft machines, that's gross. They are reanimated clockwork soldiers built by Carcosan scientific units. They scour battlefields for salvageable corpses, which with a little work can be put back into service for another battle or 3. Often the creation of a single construct requires the use of body parts from several corpses, giving soft machines the sewn together look of Frankenstein's monster. So the difficulty is not too high, but there are often 10 to 20 of them, so that's not great. -1 if you're against a smaller group, but -2 if an acetate officer is present, if you're fighting to render helpless and you know to destroy the disc. So the acetate officer is the one giving the orders to the group. So they can inflict undead thrashing. When the walking corpses are killed, roll a die. On an even, trade for the injury card Jarred. On odd, trade for the shock card the Tremors. And they can do monstrous mauling as well. Reeling as a shock card, -1 to focus test. Discard by taking part in a winning combat against the entity responsible for giving you this card. Acetate command. When you obey a command from the acetate officer, refresh any pool. When you disobey, composure drops to 0. Discard by taking part in a winning combat against the entity responsible for giving you this card. I think in that case, the acetate command sounds like a pretty difficult one to get rid of. At the Spirit Host. Spirit's image and demeanor are crafted from the desires of its visitors like a dream of a perfect partner. It's not a ghost, but rather a sapient, discorporate force that coalesces from dreams of Carcosa. Squad members may find an old diary or other evidence in the house suggesting that a visitor once read The King in Yellow here. It can give you susceptible or black tears, which we saw before is a really nasty one. You get a -1 difficulty if you're lonely, +2 if you've never had a place to call home. They count as a war spawn. Interesting. Talisman, a Carcosan shape-shifting parasite, takes the form of an item of adornment, such as an amulet, cross, pin, or medal. It can shift its appearance to copy existing pieces, destroying the originals in the process. Gorges itself on its host's fear, putting them in harm's way to get more of it. The fear and anxiety generated by these risky acts bypasses the victim who feels none of it. It all goes to the talisman, temporarily sating it. Oh, that is tough. So it removes your fear completely, meaning that you're going to potentially do very risky things, feeding the talisman, but doing horrible things to you. You can get a few injury cards from this. Woozy, Sawing Bite, lose 1 health per interval until you receive a difficulty 4 first aid. If the margin on that success exceeds 1, discard the card. It also has a Draining Touch, so you lose 3 health and discard on physical success. A Draining Strike. Health drops to 0 straight away. If the health is already 0, trade for Blood Drain. On a physical success, roll a die. Even discard this card and refresh health. Now, the shock cards I think will be interesting. Talisman. +1 to composure test. When given an opportunity to expose yourself to danger, roll a die. On an odd, you choose danger. Discard when the object is destroyed. You may not do this yourself or tell other players that you need it done. So they have to figure it out for themselves. Doppelganger Bait. +2 to composure test. Discard when the object is destroyed. You may not do this yourself or tell other players that you need it done. If still in hand after 3 hours game time, you leave play, replaced by a copy of you played as a villainous GMC. Wow. That's pretty cool. Horrible, but cool. Translated Soldiers. So these are soldiers that have occasionally fallen through the shifting place between competing realities, winding up in strange new locations. They at first appear disoriented and confused. They can be friendly GMCs and explore role-playing with ancient soldiers. Otherwise, the Carcosan agents who summoned them locate the soldiers and offer them a choice. Either the translated soldiers work for the agent's side, or they have no hope of returning to their homes. This thus becomes their motivation in attacking the PCs as foes. So you can get Sword Laceration or Sword Stab, which is pretty tough. You lose 1 point from each physical pool after any physical test, and it counts as 2 injury cards, and you can trade for Sword Laceration, but only after a difficulty 6 first aid. They're soldiers basically, so they're evenly matched. The use of weird weapons and Black Star magic increases the incidences of reality shifts. They're more likely to turn up if you're using magic. Washerwoman. The Washerwoman, an ancient entity from Carcosa, believes fresh corpses must be carefully tended to regardless of allegiance. She manifests as a middle-aged, plainclothes woman with hair the color of a raven's wing and skin the color of a rainy cloud. She's claiming the casualties of war for her own purposes. She carefully washes and anoints an unburied corpse until the body is fully prepared for burial. One can interrupt the funerary rites, but doing so causes her to immediately fixate on a new corpse or claim a life to replace the body she lost. Though many believe the washerwoman is performing a necessary service by taking care of hastily buried bodies or rank corpses left to rot, she is not, and investigators who ignore her do so at their own peril. She can summon undead and make ghosts do her bidding. Every prepared body she claims for her own is a potential soldier in her army. When threatened, she shapeshifts into a raven and attacks her aggressors by pecking them to death. So you can get pecked in the noggin! Ouch. -1 to physical and focus tests at the end of an interval, roll a die and discard on even. Or you become the property of the washer. -1 to physical and focus test. You may not interfere with the washer's desires as you understand them. Discard by placing a new, more appealing victim in her path or when she's destroyed or banished. Ooh, I hate those. When they force you to do something nasty to get rid of the card, that's always tough. We've also got Woodwives. Neither dryad nor tree spirits. They're ancient spirits of the forest brought to life by powerful Carcosan energies. They're neither good nor evil and have not taken sides in the war. They desire nothing more than to be left alone and seek eternal rest. Not from Carcosa, nor are they mutants. They were once humans who died tragically and are now angrily protect the forest and each other. But if you do fight them, the difficulty is superior. They appear 3 and 4 at a time, and they can give you splinters. -1 to physical tests. After physical failure, spend 1 health to discard, or you can be struck by wood debris. -2 to physical tests. If you have difficulty 5 for aid, roll a die. On even, trade for splinter, and on an odd, trade for patched up. So that you get +1 difficulty if you're in the forest, and +1 if you've harmed a tree, +2 if you felled a tree. That makes sense. Yeah. Now we got Aftermath. That's quite a cool one, I have to admit. That's a nice full pager there. So for the Aftermath, we get Blackeyed Kids. That's scary. I hate scary children. A knock on the door or a tap at the window reveals 2 children aged 10 to 12. Their eyes are completely black. They wear dirty threadbare clothes. One holds a battered skateboard. They ask to be led inside to warm up or use the phone. They're Carcosan children. Orphaned by the closure of the Carcosan gates, they seek out families to look after them, but they seek twisted alien love that humans cannot provide. When a family inevitably fails to provide for them adequately, their malicious instincts take over, leading them to psychically dominate and torment their would-be benefactors. Blackeyed Kids torture and kill the new family before moving on to find a new household. So more likely to flee rather than to fight if discovered. But they have a lot of injury cards here. They can do pint-sized injury, non-lethal. After 1 interval, roll a die. On an even, discard. On an odd, trade for the shock card embarrassed. So that's another printing error. I'm not sure that should be all bold. Pint-sized kick, non-lethal. -1 to physical tests. After 1 interval, roll a die. On an even, discard. On an odd, trade for the shock card humiliated. Okay. Muzzy-headed, heavily sedated. We've seen. Embarrassed is just non-lethal. -1 to focus. Discard on a composure failure. Humiliated, non-lethal. -1 to presence. Discard by winning over a difficult or intimidating witness, but it can also give you a hit, so taking points away from your goal. So can't catch a break, you just seem unlucky somehow. -1 to politics and network tests when dealing with people's deputies and other members of the political class, or ripple of unease, mistakenly giving ammunition to people who want to give more powers to the police. -1 to politics tests if your goal is tagged freedom or trust. Discard by taking a risk to foster freedom or trust. So they appear 2 at a time always. Difficulties evenly matched. Difficulties +1 if the player character has or had children. -1 if the former freedom fighters notice that human children are uncomfortable around the Blackeyed Kids. Well, that should be fairly easy to discover. Crouch preys on the fearful and anxious by using its shadow forms to attack victims as they step across the threshold of their own homes. It's possible to track because it can only be seen at dawn or during twilight and can jump from shadow to shadow. Okay, that sounds scary. So it's a quasi-substantial bodyguard in a parageometrical ritual. It's been left behind to operate alone, seeks to open the gates between worlds, stop the American government from reforming, and place a member of the Castaigne family back on the throne. Or it's starting to think maybe what America needs is this first shadow emperor. Difficulty is superior. It gets more difficulty for each shock card you hold. +1 in a light that casts a strong or long shadow. +2 if you know who Crouch is. A reversal of the usual pattern, where knowing more about a foe improves your chances against it. You can do a telekinetic grab and throw, -1 to physical test, discard on physical success, or as recipient of a -1 point first aid spend. Telekinetic beatdown, you get -2 to physical and focus tests. After failing 1 physical and 1 focus test, roll a die. On an even, discard, and on an odd, trade for on the mend. Interesting. Devourers. Well, that's very clearly AI art. Looks quite, reminds me a bit of Lawnmower Man in the sort of crappy 90s-ness. Hungry, slithering, human-sized mutant serpents poison their victims and devour them whole. Straightforward enough. A remnant of the Castaigne regime, a gift to Castaigne from the Yellow King, brought over from Europe to assassinate political rivals and enemies of the state. They have difficulty superior, +1 difficulty if you're alone or isolated, +1 if you expressed fear or revulsion of snakes during the current scenario, -1 if you can prove they're real, and -2 if you have a bird of prey. That's cool. They have venomous fangs, so you roll a die and lose that number of health, -2 on physical tests. Devouring maw, -1 to physical tests until you change clothes and clean yourself up, -1 to presence test. As a recipient of a difficulty 5 first aid, trade for on the mend. Doppelgangers. Oh, yeah. So they first appeared a decade ago when careless workers from the Ministry of Public Works erroneously performed the parageometrical ritual required to periodically refresh the gate to Carcosa in New York City's Union Square Park. This effect pulled into our world individuals from alternate timelines split off by the yellow sign effect since 1895. They quickly adjusted to their new dimension, perhaps keeping clothes and personal effects from other realities safely hidden in their homes they took over after slaughtering their counterparts. There are subtle clues to help spot a doppelganger that often will have a bleaker toned hair and eyes, although the saturation on them is turned down. They also wear duller color tones of the same fashion their other selves wear. They covertly engage in violent predatory behavior, revealing superhuman strength when cornered. They can recognize each other and form a loose mutual benefit society. They give you a neuropathic swipe, which you trade for On the Mend as recipient of difficulty 5 first aid. They can give you neuropathic disequilibrium. Discard and the next shock card you receive are still in hand. Shock card becomes continuity. When you discard a shock card and make a difficulty 4 composure test, on a success discard the card 2. Overwhelming difficulty, so they are tough. +1 if you know yourself well, so if it's your doppelganger. -1 if you're scared of your darker tendencies. Wow, give you a total of 2 as well. Ectofly, a ghostly sentient ball of rainbow-colored light that when touched instantly freezes victims. They attack people who've threatened or harmed other Carcosans, and they want to murder the humans responsible for stranding their former selves on this plane. The vengeful ghost of Carcosans who died in the human world. So, numbers of them range from 1 in the aftermath, 3, 6, 9, or 12, bunched together in trios and other sequences. Difficulty is tough but outmatched, but they get +2 if you're holding a Carcosan hostage, +3 if you kill the Carcosan. Spectral Bite, they can inflict on you. You'd lose 3 composure immediately, and 1 per subsequent hour of world time. At the end of any interval, make a difficulty 5 health test. On a success, discard. If the margin is greater than 2, refresh your composure. Or they give you an unclean bite. After half an hour, roll a die. On a 2 to 6, discard. On a 1, trade for Titanic Fever. Yikes. Flip tops. Human soldiers tortured with Carcosan devices. They have bizarre hinge jaws. If they open their mouth too far, their head tilts backward, revealing a set of terrifying razor-sharp teeth that can rend flesh from bone. Now former military personnel lobby the provisional government to find and hospitalize them. They give you a saw cut, lose 1 health per interval for the next 3 intervals, then discard. Discard at any time as recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid. And they can also saw your throat. You can't take tests or make pushes, do anything but lie on the ground bleeding out. Trade for saw cut as recipient of a difficulty 6 first aid. That's pretty rough. Also difficulty superior, so they're quite tough. And +1 if you weren't expecting the jaw to open that far. I think most people wouldn't be. Fluffy, a boulder-sized ball of fur, bristles, claws, and teeth. The result of rapid generations of mutant hybridization. It feels only one emotion of fear and reads all moving creatures as threats, defending hyper-aggressively against its target. It rolls at them and then bites with multiple mouths. It can give you the atavistic terror of an animal attack. Shock card. Lose 2 health when you make a push. If you can't spend the points, you can't make the push. Discard by establishing your mastery over this type of creature. You can be bitten, -1 on physical test. Discard with difficulty 4 first aid success, and then a successful physical test. And you can be unnerved or agitated, which are part of the default card set. So not that tough, just 1 at a time, evenly matched. But difficulty +1 if you have a pet, or -1 if you hate animals. The Glow Glutton. Milky flesh and seemingly no other bodily features aside from a giant, gaping, toothless mouth. The larvae themselves are entirely harmless. While the victim is distracted by the larvae, the parent rises up from the earth beneath them to swallow them whole. The victim stays alive until its digestive acids begin to corrode their flesh, which takes about a day. Horrible. So you can get a big bite from them, -2 to physical test this and next interval, plus -1 to physical test for the interval after that. After yet another interval, roll a die, on an even discard, and an odd trade for jarred. Bigger bite, -2 to physical test for the next hour table time, and -1 for the following hour, then discard. If still in hand at the end of the session, it becomes a continuity card, with the clock restarting at the beginning of your next session. Ooh, that's rough. So there's just 1 of them. Difficulty is not that great, but they strike with surprise. So difficulty is -2 if the Glow Glutton is hibernation phase, but it's also -1 if you're prepared for it to emerge. And the jarred card is just an injury card you discard at the end of the session. Golden Sigil Parties. Extreme themes. Content advisory, okay. So they held parties, reinforcing mass anonymity with the threat of death. All the party throwers asked in return was the worship of a large golden symbol emblazoned on the wall, an inverted sign painted black with the yellow sign upon it. The original members all now wore rings to match this instead, and extracted promises from party guests that should Dukas call upon them for a favor they must comply. Even though the regime has fallen and most Carcosan banned from America, the party still remain gliding under the radar by the grace of Durzdal's power. Yeah, some creepy stuff going on there. They can also give you a laceration or a flesh wound, number between 1 to 7, evenly matched, -1 if you have high observation skills. Okay, so not too terribly threatening. Granitites, goblin-like creatures with features like a rough-hewn stone. They live under the earth and are oftentimes covered with so much muck and soil that they appear to be constantly shedding it. They form entire underground civilizations, and for the most part are concerned with their own politics. However, whether through an alliance with the Castaigne regime or pre-existing age-old traditions, Granitites rely on humans for one specific need. They use human body parts for their machinery and weapons. Of course, there's always a catch. Wouldn't you know it? Oh, and they can give you a lot of cards here. What the... It's a shock card. -1 to your next presence test. Discard when a PC, yourself included, discards an injury card taken in a fight in which your side was targeted by a weird weapon. It's quite specific. World Gone Mad. -1 to presence test. Discard when a PC, yourself included. Yeah, again, a weird weapon. Okay, so that's -1 to all presence tests. That's just -1 to your next presence test. Okay. Rattled. Your next test take -1 penalty, then discard. Diverting indiscretion will put this into perspective. So this is the one where you need to take a risk or a vice. Body weapon hit, body weapon wound. These are all relatively standard injuries. And the Insonic. Thick dark fog visible only to the victim. When the Insonic enters a part of its victim's body, that part feels leaden and drained. Investigators followed by an Insonic might see a black mist coat their arm and then immediately into the limb. Immediately muscle weakness sets in, leaving them barely able to move. They suffer a form of sleep paralysis, unable to move, eyes staring wide. The sufferer watches helplessly as a dog-like beast with a crab-like legs and mosquito's tongue sits on their chest, sucking an unidentifiable substance out of them. They arise from their bed, deeply shaken, robbed of all rest. Their energy parasites these traumatic memories as a transmission vector. Okay, that sounds pretty awful. They do Superhuman Below, Superhuman Smash, so they're quite strong, with difficulty of vastly superior. +1 difficulty if the person infected by the Insonic brings up any trauma, and +2 if you hold any shock cards. So they do feed on trauma. They give you Insomnia, you're unable to sleep. After 18 hours of wakefulness, you get -1 to all tests. Every following 12 hours, roll a die, and on an odd trade up for sleep deprivation, which gives you -2 to all tests. If you're the recipient of a difficulty 5 first aid test, you enter an induced sleep for 12 hours of world time. On awakening, roll a die on a 1 to 2 trade for Insomnia, and on a 5 to 6 discard. Kids Club Sleeper Agent. Content Advisory. Okay. During the long and successful reign of Castaigne's Kids Club, the Imperial government used the program to brainwash children and create Carcosa Sleeper Agents. Creepy clown turning kids into Carcosan agents. Interesting. They can give you thrown free of the explosion or in the blast radius, which we've seen before. Stolen memory, -1 to focus test. Discard when you destroy or help to destroy the being who did this to you. Stolen loyalty is a shock with continuity. When a GMC flashes the yellow sign, you must make a difficulty 4 composure test to avoid obeying that person's simple commands, unless they are immediately self-destructive. Discard when you destroy or help to destroy the being who did this to you. You can also be bruised or battered. -2 difficulty if a PC displays knowledge of the Dream Clown mythos. Difficulty is superior. -1 in another sequence if you know the means of sleep or influence transmission. Okay, the namesake, so that's the regime's parageometrist, mutated into something both more and less than human after casting a flawed mystic algorithm that foolishly mixed Kabbalah with Carcosa. They now possess a gender-changing face that reshapes its features to be utterly forgettable by observers. The backlash also destroyed Namesake's name, leaving it obsessed with finding a new moniker to fill the gaping hole left behind in the universe. Namesake's attack can cause a victim's name to detach from its owner and transmigrate to a sorcerer's place. This erases that name from everyone's memory. New calculations have revealed to Namesake that one name out there in the universe, the mathematically correct one, they can permanently assume, thereby regaining human form. Thus far, none of the names Namesake has detached to fit the bill. Even these unsuitable names give it an advantage in the form of a bargaining chip. It offers to return names to victims in exchange for money, information, or services, always exacting a high price. The suddenly nameless will soon begin to fade. Without striking a bargain, they continue to fade and eventually vanish. Wow. So they give you shock cards. Difficulty's not that high, but +1 if you, the player, forgot a GMC name this session had to be reminded. -1 for each shock card in hand. And -1 if the character's given name is gender neutral. Interesting. So they can give you, what's that name again? -1 to presence test. Lose 1 composure each time your in-character dialogue reveal includes a proper name. After 1 interval, roll a die and discard on an even. For the love of a moniker is the major version, -2 to presence tests. Lose 2 points from your lowest general pool each time your in-character dialogue includes a proper name. Discard by finding Namesake's store of names. A lot of these have advisories. Interesting. Nemesis Spirit, the troubled ghost of an AIDS victim seeking revenge on the remnants of the Castaign regime. Appear as ethereal individuals dressed in retro clothing. Painful-looking Kaposi sarcoma lesions cover their sallow, tight-looking skin. At first, their bodies emit a dull glow. When they confront their victims, they shine with peach-colored light that briefly restores their pre-sickness appearance. Alright, so they have a Haunting Touch, Nemesis Strike. So when they give you a Haunting Touch, you lose 1 composure and 1 health whenever you receive this card, and in any subsequent interval when you perceive the entity that gave this to you. Discard by gaining a core clue relating to the entity. When the entity that gave you a card gives you an order, you must obey it or lose 2 composure and 2 health. If they give you a Nemesis Strike, discard by convincing the entity to spare an intended victim. They can also give you a chit of kindly presence that people find you soothing. Or unreassuring, you make people nervous. Characters can't make reassurance pushes unless they also spend 2 composure. You get -1 to your goal. And you can have a goal card here remembering the AIDS genocide. So tagged with public and trust, like the allies, all for ones, and renouncers. Interesting. Difficulty vastly superior. Difficulty -1 if PC suffers from a terminal illness, +1 if PC was complicit in similar regime atrocities. We have the Ooze. Parageometrical genetic engineers develop this bright yellow sentient fluid, fuses with and takes over organic materials on contact. Lovely. So difficulty is evenly matched. They have a difficulty adjustment of -2 if you're wearing PPE, +5 if you're trying to harm it with a means other than fire. So only fire really does anything. They can cover you in an ooze shell. You can't make physical tests requiring the ooze encased body part. Every hour roll a die on an even trade for becoming ooze. Trade for superficial burns with the recipient of a difficulty 3 first aid test. If you get becoming ooze as a continuity, lose 1 composure and 2 health. Trade for amputation as a recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid success. If still held at the end of the session, the ooze has completely devoured your body, killing you. You'll just get superficial burns, -1 to physical test, discard by having first aid on yourself or having 1 first aid spent on you. Or amputation, a continuity injury, -1 to athletic tests, discard by acquiring a replacement limb, supernatural or super technological. We have a parageometrical savant with creepy eyeballs. They wield the ability to manipulate probability through intuitive understanding of Carcosan science. Mostly use their powers to pursue pre-existing goals. Others, unable to comprehend their transformation, spiral into self-destruction or create chaos by activating their powers subconsciously. They can do telekinetic grab and throw and beatdown, which we've seen earlier in the book. They can give you a jinx. Player to your left takes -1 to tests and discard when that player fails a test. Or ill omened, which affects your whole group. When your group starts its next fight, its margin before anyone tests fighting is -2, not the usual 0. Discard when your group loses a fight. Oh, that's rough. It hits as well, and then when it all went nuts, your mistake caused a riot. -1 to politics test if your goal is tagged order. Discard by taking a risk to bring about order. Or you can get Havoc Unleashed. Your mistakes let the monsters out. -1 to politics test if your goal is tagged vigilance. Discard by paying a price to make up for your lapse in vigilance. A Rouge Beret, the ghost of a slain painter murdered in the prime of life. They're all wearing their namesake red hats, appear surrounded by a nimbus of light, and exude a hyperreal sharpness as if they've stepped out from the canvas of a Renaissance master. They don't hunt victims to scare them or force the living to do their bidding. They appear in areas dominated by unrepentant authoritarians to paint the portrait of its next victim. Then it slaughters the intended target, paints another portrait, and continues to do so until all Castaignites in the neighborhood lie dead. Time is of the essence when dealing with a Rouge Beret. Should the ghost realize the investigators are helping Castaignites avoid execution, it declares them complicit and paints their death portraits. It can't kill without a complete, well-wrought canvas, so destroying a painting delays its spree. It can give you a stab wound or a slashed throat, which are pretty standard injuries. But really, the death portrait seems to be the main problem here. Now, why you would aid Castaignites, maybe you are just against execution in general, I suppose. We have the Sursinger. What the hell is that? That's a horrible AI portrait. Alligators in the sewer, urban legend. Large reptilian creatures but look like a cross between an alligator and a wolf. Bodies roughly alligator-shaped with wolf-like heads and limbs. So these were a created beast, but they didn't reach a level of intelligence that BPZS researchers wanted. They can use singing to trap their prey and beat your average swamp-dwelling alligator, but aren't as smart as wolves. They give you enthralled or alien passion. Difficulty is superior, +2 if you're under thrall from their singing, -1 if you can see what they look like, and -1 if you've seen BPZS records of their creation. Okay, you can also get atavistic terror of an animal attack or bitten for injury cards, which we've seen before. Unholy tears. Okay, one of the sculptures at a nearby Gothic Catholic church appears unremarkable, but sometimes appears to cry tears of blood. It can only be witnessed by one person at a time, other bystanders see nothing. Compels a strong empathy in that person who also cries with tears of blood after sitting with the angel sculpture for at least half an hour. Onlookers witness the victim crying bloody tears. As the victim weeps, a transference occurs, releasing a malevolent force within the statue. This force left over from the Castaigne regime then possesses the human. For the next 3 days and nights, the person behaves as though possessed by a traditional Catholic demon going on a rampage about town. Destroying property, committing arson, and attacking people, acting in animalistic ways, contorting the body of its host to look reminiscent of bat wings or wolf maws. Can inflict throat squeezes, -1 to physical and composure, discard or recipient at first aid test. Difficulty starts at 6 and drops by 1 at the start of each new interval. Or a breastbone piercing punch. -2 to physical and composure test, -1 to all other tests. As recipient of a difficulty 6 first aid, trade for on the mend. It can also give you shock cards of unholy whispers. Whenever players discuss what to do next, you must share a prediction of doom from the unearthly voices you're hearing. When the prediction fails, roll a die and an uneven discard. Unholy Vision. PC sense trouble failure, you visibly react to a disturbing metaphysical hallucination. All other players lose 2 composure and then roll a die. On an even trade for Unholy Whispers. Difficulty is superior. +1 if you know the possession victim, -1 if you know about the statue, -2 if the host body already heavily damaged from previous rampaging. Okay. You got the Vibrat. Exceedingly rare species, mostly live at the top of the mountains, where they're nourished by clean air sounds. BPZS captured a few, but found them difficult to control. They're distinguished from humans by their exceedingly thin and pale limbs and their constantly dilated eyes. Their raspy voices sound like multiple people speaking at once, a feature caused by divided vocal cords. They feed on sonic waves favoring harmonious sounds, music most especially. They hunt musicians, capturing them to forever play the melody they favor. When Verbrats mentally compel captives to pick up their instruments, wing-like stretches of light unfurl behind them, hence the angelic resemblance. Victims ignore all their other needs, playing until dying of thirst, hunger, or exhaustion. They can give you clawed or eviscerated, or they have new shock cards, musically inclined. If you feel a strong compulsion to sing or play music for the entity that did this to you, lose 1 composure at the end of each interval in which you did not make a good faith attempt to find the entity, and do that. If composure is 0 and you're in the entity's presence, trade for musically exhausted. Discard when the entity dies or breaks its hold on you. Mentally exhausted. If you're not in the presence of the entity that did this to you and playing music for it, flash forward to the moment where you are, explaining how that happened. You can only undertake tasks you can perform while singing or playing for the entity. Lose 1 health or 1 composure every 20 minutes of game time. Discard when the entity dies or breaks its hold on you. Ooh, that's rough. Evenly matched difficulty, but you get some minuses if you have no musical talent. Plus 1 difficulty if you mistake it for an angel. Finally, we got a few for this is normal now as well. According to urban legend, Silicon Valley concocted the infamous blue screen of death to force users to buy replacement tech. They're half right. Blue is a sentient techno-spirit that travels through the internet to download itself onto another machine. After settling into a machine, it drains the battery or overcranks the power supply until it's at capacity. Then it hastily switches locations, triggering a blue screen of death, transmitting that stored electrical charge to fatally shock computer users or fry their tech. Cool. The blue screen of death is an enemy. So they're the Whisperers of the Sign. While in their presence, other players suffer -1 to composure test. When another player fails a composure test by a margin of 1, roll a die. On an even, you can discard, or you get Shock of the Sign, which is a continuity shock. -2 composure test, -1 to presence. You may refresh any pool other than composure by committing murder. Yikes. Discard the recipient of an inspiration or reassurance push or by making a steal push. You also get zapped by the electricity. -3 on athletics and fighting test for being like the one who zapped you. After an hour of roll time, discard by spending 1 health. High voltage, you get -1 to your next physical test, -1 to the physical test after that. Then trade for On the Mend. Botana Hive, so formerly ordinary trees mutated by Carcosan energy, they have adapted their hunting techniques to the selfie era. They take the form of startlingly beautiful flowers or shrubbery, luring victims by attempting to pose for photos next to them. They brush the foliage against unknowing victims, releasing soothing chemicals, lulling them into complacency. The Botana Hive wraps them completely in its leaves, concealing them from view, and feasts for days, absorbing their nutrients through its leaves. Then it shifts all inorganic clothing and possessions down the trunk, down to the roots. It uses its root network to enter into their technological items and access all the information stored there, then hacks into the victim's personal accounts, manufactures images of them online, and continues on with their online presence, despite their being dead. Some messages act as bait, luring other people towards it so it can feast on them. Bullshit Detector reveals that the tone of a victim's social media presence is wildly altered in recent weeks. Wow, that is cool. I really like that. Numbing Sap, -1 to all tests, difficulty 3 athletics, test required to move away. After an hour touching a trade for Cocooned, discard after 2 hours of world time away from it. If you're cocooned, you do not wish to leave the embrace of the creature that did this to you. Every hour of world time, lose 1 health point. Discard when you're the recipient of an appropriate push. Difficulty is superior, +2 if you don't know that the Potato Hive numbs its victims, -1 if you're wearing PPE, and -1 if you're killing it with fire. Catfish. Okay, that's gross. Humanoid Carcosans stand around 120 millimeters tall with willowy limbs and elongated torsos. They have suction cups like an octopus. They can regenerate regrowing limbs or even their heads, provided the torso remains more or less intact. They take advantage of modern dating apps and social media, talking to multiple victims for months, posing as a potential romantic interest. Wow, so it's an actual catfish. They're too clever by half, these guys. You can be grazed, we've seen before, or latched onto. When the being that did this to you gives you an instruction to make a difficulty 4 composure test. On a failure, you obey. On a success, discard. Discard when the being that did this to you dies. If still in hand at the end of the scenario, you dig your own grave and die inside of it. Oh my god. So difficulty adjustments, it's vastly superior already. -1 if you're expecting a catfish to appear. Okay, so moving on, we have the Chirper. It prefers to attack while its target is scrolling idly through apps on its phone. An inquisitive text from a hidden number will appear, which seems to come from an estranged friend. The texts are empathetic. Hey, how's it going? Tell me everything. That must feel so difficult for you, blah, blah, blah. Who the friendship is and their friendship history is at first hazy. Slowly, though, memories return as vignettes in their mind of rejuvenating brunches and drunken movie nights. Of course, they've always known this friend and trust them with the deepest, darkest anxieties. They've been in touch with this friend daily, oversharing vulnerabilities with ease, and the friend is never judgmental but instead validating. The good friend becomes a small comfort to them, a rock in their daily life. The victim behaves increasingly troubling ways. The more they touch with their new friend, they slowly withdraw from all other friends in social life. They stop going to their job and they are callous to everyone else. They turn pale and gaunt as the emotional toll attacks their body. The Chirper consumes each emotional text the person sends, eating their empathy until there is none left. Spurring from lack of empathy, the victim is reliant upon the Chirper for all emotional support. Yikes. They can give you a Friend of Carcosa shock card every hour on the hour game time. You must contact or be contacted by the entity that gave you this card or lose 1 composure. As a result of a relevant interpersonal push, roll a die and on an even discard, or you can get Alien Dependence. Every hour on the hour, you must perform an action that would please the entity that gave you this card, or gain the shock card Racked by Remorse. Discard when the entity is defeated or destroyed. That won't be super easy. The difficulty is superior. You get +2 difficulty if you're upset with friends, or +1 if you're lonely, plus a total of 2 as well. Copycat Killers. People who commit murders based on earlier famous killings. In this game, artificial artifacts called curios, which come from murder scenes and carry immense Carcosan energy, drive potential copycat killers to become obsessed with historical murders and carry them out. In a real normal game, before the strangeness of rampages and SRIs, copycat killers act much as they do in our own world. Hook the player's interest by incorporating some aspect of an early adventure. For example, read them newspaper headlines that describe a murder with eerie similarities, something they've already investigated in another sequence, or have the killer obliquely mention the yellow sign or Carcosan entities in a streamed interview. After a normalcy shift, everyone is compromised. Online communities emerge where copycat killers are committed on a viral scale. Yikes. So they can give you a knife, a slash, or deep stab, which we've seen before as physical injuries, but the shock cards are new. We got Copycat Effect. -1 to focus. When you use an investigative ability to gain a core clue, roll a die. On a 3 or higher, discard. Copycat Ideation. When you fight with an objective other than kill, the shock card you most recently discarded returns to your hand. Discard by destroying the object at the center of this case. Well, that's interesting. So difficulty's not that high. Kill 5. -1 difficulty if the details of the curio and crime are known. +1 if any PC has already received the Copycat Effect or Copycat Ideation shock card. Dead Shift. You can change size and shape at will. Disgraced federal worker active in the message board connects dead shifts to Dry biomaterials. He describes them as a product of his illegal gene splicing, taking DNA from a chameleon, a spider, and a human corpse. Other Yell members think the dead shifts are humans transformed by white sky rituals. A much upvoted post theorizes that a missing thief tried to rob the Temple of Hali, got caught, and was turned into a dead shift. Dead shift was a human, but not that one. Dead shift was once the brilliant scientist Dr. Enrico Hernandez, who devised a containment field to safely study Carcosan energies. The well-respected bioengineer was tending to his experiments when his containment field malfunctioned. He suffered the full effects of a blast that killed him and irrevocably chained his body. Interviewing traumatized witnesses, the team learns that they watched as a disembodied yellow hand ripped the doctor's soul from his body. Before they could retrieve his corpse, the body had disappeared. Okay, so they need to recreate his containment field to defeat it. I give you a Blight Strike. At the end of each interval, you lose 2 health, and all other PCs within 100 yards of you lose 1 health. On health failure, roll a die and discard on an even result. A Blight Swipe, roll a die and lose that number of health points, and then discard on a health failure. Difficulty is vastly superior, so they're pretty tough. +1 difficulty if you're a government worker, +1 if you make it sad or angry, -2 if you can entertain dead shift, -2 if you can teach something new, but the total is high at 3. Disintegrators are members of an extreme music scene that incorporates the King in Yellow and other Carcosan imagery into lyrics, art, and performances. So it could be like extreme metal focused on the King in Yellow or something like that. That's pretty cool. Look at that. That's the band members, really? They can give you well that hurt or cracked ribs. -2 if you participate in any of the subcultures. +2 difficulty if 2 or more players already hold a Mythos shock card. And then you have a Trick of the Light and no mask, no mask. So those are all repeat shock cards. Dry Leaves. Haunted sentient husks of giant Carcosan bees that have a simplistic purpose to pollinate. The dry leaves can reform their bodies at will to torture the owners of these items, inflicting bee-themed nightmares. Carcosan bees release nightmare-inducing pollen that affects victims when they're awake. Pollen causes waking nightmares in animals and humans, which create a sickly yellow ooze, Carcosan honey, which drips from a victim's ear. Carcosan honey is a high concentration of terror. One small drop can cause a victim to lose consciousness. Once armed with specimens of the creatures, the team's resident experimenter can use a science push to modify an ordinary pesticide to destroy them. Cool. So they have a Nightmare Touch, -2 to Composure test, and discard when you take a shock card. Mind Strike, -2 to Presence test. When you take a shock card, roll a die and discard on an even. Difficulty is superior, and +1 if you use the object, +2 if you damage the object, +2 if you try to destroy it with fire, -2 if you have terrain, -2 if you're the recipient of a terrain push. They're considered a construct. Then we have Euphorium. So they sell powdered drugs named UO, claiming that it's entirely safe, non-addictive, and causes a euphoric high beyond any other street drug. Technically, that's not a lie. Those who take it report a nearly spiritual high with ecstatic pulses carrying them into another plane. Euphorium makes UO out of their own biological material, usually powdered blood. While the imbiber is high, their DNA mingles with the powder, and the Euphorium receives an imprint of the user's form, which gives the ability to mimic them through shapeshifting. The victim might walk into a room for the first time that day, only to be addressed as if they just left. The Euphorium is sure to be in the public eye as much as possible to fragment the victim's sense of reality, sometimes allowing themselves to be glimpsed by their victims. They only cease their deception once uneasiness creeps into every aspect of their target's lives, leaving them with no grasp on reality. Someone targeted by a Euphorium can't reintegrate and takes a permanent -1 on composure tests. Ooh, that is cool. So they can give you shock cards of a taste of UO, shock continuity, -1 to composure and sense trouble tests. Once per scenario, after at least 2 hours of game time, we make a difficulty 4 health test. On a success, discard. UO addict. A copy of you is running around doing sinister things. If you had learned of a new incident involving your doppelganger during the scenario, -2 to composure test. Trade for a taste of UO when the doppelganger dies. They also give you a stab wound or a slashed throat in a physical confrontation. Difficulty is +3 if they're wearing your face. Then we have Flat Feet. A singular entity known as Flat Feet preys on victims using their extraordinary stealth granted by its two-dimensional shape. Investigators and witnesses may mistake Flat Feet for a stray shadow. Science applied to a live scene or image might know that shadow does not correspond to the room's light sources. They can also conceal themselves in confined spaces, slide under door frames, into drawers, and under carpeting. They eat Carcosan energy and any living thing or object that radiates it. It hunts both Carcosans and other creatures from the Yellow King's realm, and people whose lives have been altered by the sign. Alright. They can give you a Claw Strike or a Claw Frenzy. Difficulty superior, -2 in a perfect vacuum, -2 if you expose it to antimatter, +2 if you are in physical contact with a Carcosan, rampage, or invasive during the current scenario, -1 on a natural history or science push. Flicker. Imaginary buildings called flickers pop up from nowhere to trap and absorb unwary victims into a collective consciousness. They retroactively alter the memories of passing people so that they believe there's always been a building there. Flickers adopt the guise of buildings with a hypnotic addictive energy like nightclubs, betting parlors, or concert venues. The illusion, with tactile, auditory, and olfactory as well as visual elements, includes a bustling crowd. So it shifts locations every few days. Those under its sway instinctively feel drawn to it no matter how far it has moved from its original position. A flicker's illusion hides its true manifestation, a pulsing black tangle of matter, placing it in an imaginary basement secret room. This heart can be physically attacked. The flicker defends itself by ordering its enthralled occupants to fight. Wow. So the difficulty varies by the number of enthralled occupants who have yet to be fully absorbed into the hive mind. Starts at tough but a match for one occupant, going up by one challenge step for every additional occupant. Investigators can decrease the challenge by getting occupants out before attacking. +1 difficulty for each time you enter the flicker, including this one, +2 if you haven't found the core. And the toll is according to the challenge rating. Wow, so they can be pretty impossible to defeat if they're really strong. You can also get roughed up or sucker punched. We have the Fontaines, a family cult that manipulates their innocent youngsters to deviant ends. The family matriarch planned to give birth to a vessel for the Yellow King. Her own children didn't hit the mark, but her grandchildren are perfect. She's been supernaturally grooming her unsuspecting grandchildren in accordance with pages torn from the text of the King in Yellow. So they contain ritual actions to manifest the King in Yellow to human flesh. One body is not enough, he needs two. The two youngest members of the family have both begun exhibiting the early signs of Carcosan transference. Both teens suffer from insomnia, experiencing waking visions of an alien landscape calling them to alien tongues. They lose several hours at a time, reawakening somewhere else with no memory of what happened. They notice disturbing things about themselves at these lapses in time, like someone else's blood on their hands, human hair tucked in their pockets, dead animals piled at their feet. They've grown scared something trying to kill them, but don't know what to do. Wow, creepy. They can only do bruised and battered, so I think these are children you're meant to help. They're terrified and looking for answers, so you want to thwart their grandmother Lillian rather than the children themselves. So they're not too tough in combat, but that's not really the point. Footlickers are intelligent alien animals, which is like a cross between a frog and an eel. They want to feed, grow, lay eggs, die, hatch, and start the process all over again. Their paralytic saliva is so potent it is believed to work on all living things, even Carcosans. They can detect victims 30 meters away who are either near death or already dying. Witnesses may confuse them for giant sewer alligators or boa constrictors flushed down the toilet. Interesting. And these, they give you basic poison cards that we've seen in the standard pool. Difficulty is superior, however. +1 if your preparedness pool exceeds 6, implying a heavily laden pack. +1 if the GM got you to describe yourself eating aromatic food or drink a few hours prior to the encounter. -1 if you have natural history or science, or -2 if you made a push for either of those abilities. Then we have glitches. Mini monsters resemble football-sized sea urchins with long purple and red spines. So electricity is the creature's food and firepower, arcs between their spines whenever they move. By using beaks hidden under their spherical bodies, they cut through or attach themselves to buildings, coupling stations, and power lines. If lacking a major source of electricity to feed upon, glitches snack on human nervous systems instead. Alright, that seems bad. They can give you knocked out condition. You fall unconscious and can take no further action for 30 minutes of world time, then wake up and discard. If you wake up as a prisoner and do not gain an opportunity to gain key information on the result, you may then discard a non-continuity shock card. Or you can get a neural hemorrhage, less helpful. You fall unconscious and can take no further actions. After 30 minutes of world time, you wake up, trading this card for your choice of the injury card on the mend or the shock card rattled. If you wake up as a prisoner and do not get an opportunity to gain key information as a result, you may then discard a non-continuity shock card. Lost Waters. SRIs are universally recognized and often not thoroughly investigated, and so the bar for covering your tracks as a human murder has lowered. Bodies get dumped at rivers, lakes, or other bodies of water and are never found. A concentration of these bodies in a specific area manifests malevolent energy known as Lost Waters. Partially sentient and have vague recollections from the bodies which they have manifested, but they are incapable of cunning schemes or plots. They move through municipal pipes infecting the water supply with melancholy. They feed off of the misery, and the more of it in the atmosphere, the stronger Lost Waters become. There's no physical form for investigators to battle against, but they can dissipate the energy of the Lost Waters by finding the corpses, identifying them, and returning the bodies to their loved ones. Okay. They can give you the shock card Melancholy. Focus test, take a penalty equal to the number of shock cards you have in your hand. When you fail any test, make a decision prompted by profound angst. Discard on destruction of the hazard or entity that did this to you. And this is a hazard, by the way, not a creature. Or you can be overcome. Focus test, take a penalty equal to the number of shock cards you have in your hand. Once an hour game time, make a self-sabotaging decision. Discard on destruction of the hazard or entity that did this to you. Got the Midnight Mare. This is a bit hideous. It's got all sorts of legs coming out in the wrong places. A psychotropic ambulatory plant that does not require sunlight, water, fertilizer, or ground to live. Petals have blotches on them that look like the yellow sign, and it runs on 4 roots like a galloping horse. This Carcosan species feeds on a steady diet of negative emotions and is magnetically attracted to humans who are constantly stressed. That would be bad for me then. So the plant can attack pursuers by shooting pollen at them, adding more victims and supplicants that the Yellow King can manipulate. Any yellow sign conspiracy could use Midnight Mares against investigators probing them as an antagonist reaction or to protect key clue-rich locations. So once the victim inhales the pollen, the particles react and spread into their lungs and bloodstream, forging a direct link between the sleeper and the Yellow King. The victim sleeps fitfully and suffers from a terrible nightmare. Okay, that's pretty rough. You can get a soul swipe from them. A recipient of a dream command from the Yellow King, you must obey it or gain the card Yellow Doom. And if you gain Yellow Doom, it's injury, shock, and continuity. If still in hand after 24 hours, your character dies. Discard by striking a significant blow against the forces of Carcosa. Okay, so not that tough in a physical fight, but the pollen is bad news. Uthocoids, insectoid parasites that take control of their bodies of human hosts. In the true form, they resemble hand-sized cockroaches or mantises. Ugh. Once embedded in the abdomen of a victim, they slowly take over their host and bend their will toward creating a suitable home for their thousands of offspring. Well, that looks pretty gross, I gotta say. They create a protein-rich, chitinous substance within the host's stomachs. The goo, once vomited up along with the eggs, hardens and protects these eggs. These casing varies in size and attached to walls and ceilings, or can stand freely and resemble a huge anthill. Unchecked, the creature grows these casing mounds as large as possible. The biggest structures fill entire apartments. They kidnap humans and use them for food, where they store along with the eggs in their excreted structures. That's really gross. So they can give you Uthocoid Spray, -1 to focus and presence test, discard for Draggy at next interval, discard refreshing health by taking the antidote. Uthocoid Slime, you get -2 to all tests. If this is your final card, your character becomes host to an Uthocoid as a GM character. Discard by taking the antidote. Draggy is choose 1 general ability, focus, physical, or presence, and -1 to tests of that type. After any failure, discard if you have no other non-continuity, shock, or injury cards. Now, the Order of Baphomet existed in secret for several generations, a group of absurdly rich artists who worship the demon Baphomet. Despite their wealth, they do have creative talent that is showcased in exclusive galleries for the ultra-rich. The abstract postmodern shapes and forms lend themselves an uncanniness not unlike Carcosan imagery. Their worship extends beyond art making into their lifestyles. They perform more traditional demon worship through human sacrifice. Instead of spilling blood, the members of the order will cover the naked bodies in painted yellow signs and dance wildly around a bound victim. The dance is terrifying to the victim, bending space and time. Wherever the victim goes for the next 24 hours, Carcosa follows them, manifesting the physical space around them. Reality bends around them, which makes the casual viewer of this phenomenon disbelieve their own reality like they're staring into a portal. At the end of the 24 hours, Utsumu's inky tentacles pull their victim into Carcosa, and the spell ends. They give you a dagger cut or deep stab in physical combat. Number 7, difficulty superior. -1 difficulty if you're drawn to artist. -2 sense if your reality is already wavering. Sad boy with an eye. Appears as a normal human in all physical respects. Guarded demeanor. Aesthetic affectation emphasizing graphic shirts with edgy slogans or supposedly ironic jokes about death, depression, and suicide. They drain victims' emotion primarily through face-to-face encounters. Later they discovered that their ability could be transferred through media such as political tracts and circuit letters. In modern times, social media and the internet have multiplied the reach of sad boys and their emotion-sucking powers by orders of magnitude. Well, of course. They act as collection and bottling plants for Carcosans who drink human emotions. Willing agents get momentary relief from their own melancholy when they transfer hijacked emotions to their pallid masters. They can give you blow to the head or ringing cranium, or lethargy, -1 to physical test, discard by delivering a setback to the entity that causes effect, or chalky, -3 to physical test, discard when the entity that causes effect is defeated. Okay. Difficulty superior, -1 difficulty if you played your character as insensitive, thick-skinned, or stoic, +1 if you play your character as melancholy or empathetic. Then we have the Swayed. They belong to a secret order dedicated to strengthening the influence of Carcosa over the world. Become neurologically altered by long-term exposure to Carcosa and the yellow sign, leaving them irreversibly bound. They operate in cells with loose power structures. Okay. They are more resilient, faster, and stronger than normal humans, having been strengthened by the yellow sign. Nothing betrays this enhancement. Even when fighting, they appear hyper-competent, but not overtly inhuman. They can give you a picked up and thrown hard, so lose to health and composure, discard after half an hour, or a monstrous battering. Trade down for On the Mend after you get a difficulty 6 first aid success. Until then, get -2 to physical tests. At the end of the scenario, if you still have it, you get a permanent injury. Difficulty superior. The numbers are 1 or equal to the number of characters present at the time. We got talking heads. Look at that. They masquerade as media personalities. They exist to propagate misinformation and subtle paranoia. They use the stolen identities of news anchors, YouTube personalities, and late-night talk show hosts to present stories of secret government conspiracies and attacks. These reports mask instances of real Carcosan influence. Ah, clever. Bulbous and chitinous, these creatures live in the chest, neck, and hollowed-out heads of hosts. By force from a host, a talking head crawls across the ground and inserts itself into the nearest human body it can secure. While ensconced within the head of a host, the creature uses its hypnotic voice to lull listeners into an unconscious agreement with its socially corrosive messages. Wow. I love the satirical side of that. They have eel-like teeth. As an injury, discard by spending 1 health as recipient of a difficulty 4 first aid success or after 24 hours world time. Anesthetic bite gives you -1 to focus test. Discard when you are sure the creature that dealt you this injury is dead. But they also have shock cards, susceptible, lose 1 composure when exposed to images or ideas of the ideological tendency promoted by the original propaganda message. Loss limited to 1 point per scene. After taking a risky action that furthers propagandist objectives, you may discard on a difficulty 4 composure success. Or you can get ideological capture. When confronted by an opportunity to further propagandist objectives, make a difficulty 4 composure test. On a failure, you must take that action. When the action has a negative result for you, your friends, or the investigation, you may spend a push to roll a die. On an even, discard. On an odd, trade for susceptible. Then we have the Tesseract, the world's most popular augmented reality game. Not coincidentally, it's also a Carcosan thought form made manifest in this reality through electronic networks and telecommunications matrices. The game is alive. There we go. So it uses virtual reality headsets and smartphones. Teams compete against each other to maintain virtual control over portions of IRL real estate by tagging these locations with yellow signs and other Carcosan imagery. Subtly manipulating its players through large-scale game events, storylines, and subliminal messaging, Tesseract has created a real-world, cyclically linked lattice of black star energy that supervenes on reality, jacking up the thought form's power. Oh, pretty hardcore. Yeah, and lots of different ways for them to manifest in the other sequences. They give you Rupped Up or Black and Blue. Freemium model is a shock card. I love that. Lose 1 composure each time you go for more than 1 interval without playing the game. Lose 1 health and 1 athletics each time you play the game. Discard by making or receiving a computer's push. Game over. Lose 2 composure each time you go for more than 1 interval without playing the game. Lose 2 health and 2 athletics each time you play. Gain injury card Persistent Headache if any of these pools drop to 0. Persistent Headache gives you -1 to focus tests. After 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep, and on a 5 or higher, discard the card. Wow, that's pretty funny. Yeah, a lot of creativity in these monsters, even if I'm a little bit sad about the AI art. Wire snakes aren't supposed to exist, but almost everyone believes in them. Doesn't attack its users physically, but does damage psychically. So they are tiny concussive mind worms summoned by occultists who are stumbled across the secret of the Pallid Mask. Its victims are almost always people participating in a reintegration program who have used Absinthe apps. They have different manifestations and different modes of play in the This Is Normal Now setting. You can get vague symptoms, which means when you make a physical test, you must first spend 1 health. On a success, roll a die. If it's even, you can discard this, or you can get Wire Snake Disorder. Anytime you get a die result of 6 on any test, re-roll the die and use that result instead. If you re-roll but still succeed, trade for vague symptoms. So they're not very difficult to deal with, but I suppose they'd be quite hard to detect, given the vague symptoms. And there you go. So that is the Carcosan Bestiary, Legions of Carcosa. You can see there's a huge amount of creativity involved in this book. I think it is really valuable for gameplay purposes, but the AI art is troublesome. I'm bothered by that, and I hope that they don't do it again in the future. Having said that, some of the AI art is reasonably appropriate. Some of it is actually pretty terrible. So I don't think it was an entirely successful experiment, and also, of course, there's fan backlash to deal with, so I think we probably won't see much of this again from Pelgrane. I still think they're a great company that makes great quality products. You know, the book still, they're always high quality prints. Pages are lovely and thick. You know, the quality as far as gameplay is always there. You've got loads of interesting satirical stuff in here. So definitely worthy of the game. So I do recommend it, but just if you're not into the whole AI art thing, beware. Other than that, I think it's a shoe-in for a great supplement for the game. Just so much interesting things. And some of these creatures are unique enough that you could set a whole investigation around them. I mean, it's just an adventure seed on a page, basically. So I hope that was useful for you if you were looking into this book or to the YKRPG more generally. I'm going to stop covering the game now from here because the other supplement I have is Absinthe and Carcosa, which I think is much better used as kind of an in-game artifact for students playing in the Paris sequence, and therefore it doesn't really benefit from my review. I mean, you really need to kind of experience it as part of that era of play. So I would say just buy the bundle that includes it. when you buy the game from Pelgrane, and that's probably the best way to understand it. Pelgrane has a sort of pedigree of doing this kind of thing. They create in-game artifacts that are real books as well, and so you can use them as a GM resource or player resource and as a resource in-game, and I think that's really interesting and cool, and they've done it again with that book. So beyond that, I won't spend a video on that. We'll move on. Until then, take care, stay sane, and take care. Leave a like and a comment and on the way out, and do subscribe if you feel up to it. Take care of yourself, and see you in the next video. All right, bye-bye.